Going further, let's please give it up for Brother Ross Morgan with the beautiful accent on our faces. Brothers and sisters, I'd like to greet you on behalf of Reality Speaks. My name is Sundiata. I'm a Reality Speaks representative. And it's so, excuse the problems, but it's wonderful to see everybody out here. Everybody looks wonderful and beautiful and in good health. And we have a very beautiful treat for y'all tonight. We got a fashion show, a mini fashion show. We asked y'all to bear with us. We got our own clothing line, so it's nothing better for us to come out here and show the people what young black men are doing in the community. Nice African Senate fashion also, you know. A lot of people wear Nike, Reeboks, and all other stuff. We just want to show you what we got, okay? So as I continue, I would just also like to give thanks to Brother Renogo Rashidi. We must clap it up for him because this brother has been doing dynamic things across the world. I mean, the brother is fantastic. The brother has an absolutely fantastic presentation, and I saw it for the first time a couple months ago over there in Dunbar High School, and I mean, it's awesome. If this is your first time here, I guarantee you definitely have something to go back home with and share with your family, definitely. So clap it up one more time for Brother Renogo Rashidi. You know that, brother. Strong brother. And before I go any further, I would like everyone to go in the back, support the vendors. We got Brother David Miller back there. Raise your hand, Brother David. Positive role model in the community. He got what you got back there? Your 10 Commandments, right? 10 Commandments for young men. It's nice. You can post it up for your sons, for your grandchildren. They got some nice principles, you know what I'm saying, so that they can follow. So, you know, brother back there is doing some things. We got the Sister Cool back there with the healing, the medicines back there, the herbal medicines, the herbal remedies. We got the Conscious Views table back there with mad literature, a lot of media, a lot of good works back there. We got Sister Pam back there with the bean pies and the waters. And we got Sister Lynn right there with the beautiful mask. Okay, so we asked everybody, this is the African marketplace. We ask that everybody, you know, if you can, go back there and share something with the vendors because, you know, those are our businesses that's in the community and we need to support them as much as we can. And as we move further, I just want to see if my fashion people are ready. Y'all just give me 1 minute, okay?
And you are Ross Marcus here with CDs.
Baba Ross Marcus got the CDs. Ross Marcus and the sisters, right?
Yes, sir.
Beautiful CD.
that, brothers and sisters. Coming for you with the mind state of liberation, coming from a long legacy of battle stars and freedom fighters. I acknowledge my truth, I acknowledge my duty, truth, and justice as a Reality Speaks representative, and I'm a humble servant of my community. Elders may have permission to speak. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our mini fashion show. That's just the beginning of us coming out of European clothing and trying to establish our own thing in the years to come. So please support us, because when you get into this clothing industry thing, it's expensive, very expensive, trying to get the right sizes for people, and we were putting out a lot of money for some of the things, a lot of money, a lot of time goes into designing these different outfits and all. So please come out and help Reality Speak and all the brothers and sisters with this new clothing gear that we have. One thing I want to say, it's important while we make our transformation with this clothing and things, the most important thing that we want to do while we come out of the European clothing, the most important thing that we can do is come out of the European mind state. So this is the reason why we continue with the Reality Speaks lecture series, so we can constantly bring this information to you so that we can move into Africanness, who we are, the Africans. So what we're going to do now, I just want to make one brief announcement before we get into our lecture for the day. Reality Speaks is sponsoring the African Senate Tour of Washington, D.C. Most of you who came to see Tony Browder, we told you that we were going to put together a bus trip up to D.C. And we've done that, and that will be Sunday, October the 6th. And the time is 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., and the price is $30 per person. We'll be departing from the Northwood Shopping Center, and we have more. You can look at the flyer, and we'll have it up there. But we have a sign, we have a list at the top. We have a bus for that would seat 40 people, I think. So for 47 people, so the first 47 people here to size up or whatever, you can go on the tour with us to see Tony Browder. We're going to move right into our lecture here for today. Brother Ranoko Rashidi, I first saw his presentation when he came back in February, and that was sponsored by the Soul School Institute. And we'd like to thank the Soul School Institute for helping us with the presentation here today. Without further ado, we're going to bring up Brother Ranoko, because we got a lot of information to share with you in just a short period of time. So everybody, give Brother Ranoko Rashidi a round of applause. Ranoko Rashidi.
Hold up, sisters and brothers. Do I have the permission of the elders to speak? Y'all were going to say, no, Ranoko, you have a big mouth, and they can hear you all the way outside. But anyway, I'm very pleased to be here. I want to express my gratitude to Reality Speaks for inviting me here tonight. They were a little concerned about the turnout, but it looks like we surpassed all expectations. I think you have an excellent crowd tonight. Give yourselves a round. Now, I tend not to be a very formal person. Some of you may know that I've recently gone through a medical emergency, and things are looking a lot different for me now. About 3 months ago, I came very close to having my left leg amputated. It didn't have any warning at all. I went to bed one night and it started to swell up, and I think, at least I thought at the time, I was a pretty tough guy, a legend in my own mind, and I went to the hospital, and they couldn't relieve the pressure on my leg, or in my leg. The muscles apparently had begun to swell up, and they constricted the flow of blood. So, and to top it off, I didn't have any medical insurance. And there's one thing I've learned in this country: if you are not medically insured and you confront an emergency, you are in big trouble. Okay? In the so-called greatest, freest country in the world, you're in deep trouble if you don't have medical insurance. So I was finally able to get a surgeon, and when they finally did operate, they told me that the muscles in my leg were constricted so tightly that when they removed the muscle compartment, this cheesy, elastic-like surface, I guess it keeps the muscles in. I don't know how to explain it. The muscles burst forth out of my leg. And then after that, they told me that I probably wouldn't be able to walk for at least a couple of months, and I wouldn't be able to travel, which means I wouldn't have been able to lecture for 6 months to a year. And then they held me for a long time in the hospital without telling me if I would ever really make a full recovery. So I am very fortunate. One of the things, I went out to Los Angeles to do a series of lectures for a friend of mine, a brother named Jamal Glory. He's the radio producer for a station called, a radio program called The Front Page. I grew up in Los Angeles and lived in LA for most of my life. And Brother Jamal has had most of the African-centered scholars, if not all of them, on his station. And I thought that it was time for us to do a tribute to him. I get tired of doing, well, I don't get tired of it, but it's a little frustrating giving tributes and programs for ancestors. Sometimes it's good to be able to do something for people while they are alive and can appreciate it. And we can tell them how great they are to their face. And so I went out to do this particular program. Now, this was on a Friday afternoon. The lecture was supposed to be at 6:30. They finally had the operation at 3:30. An Indian physician performed the surgery, and I wanted to ask him, hey, man, what is your cast? But I didn't think that was the appropriate thing to do with somebody getting ready to cut on you and put you under the knife. Apparently, the operation was successful. The operation took place about 3:45 to 4 in the afternoon. I woke up about 5 o'clock, and the first thing I wanted to know was, will I be able to do my lecture tonight? Now, they must have thought I was on LSD or something like that, because there I am, soaked with blood, but I was ready to go out and give a lecture. That's how much I love my work. Believe me, it's wonderful if you can find something in life that you can earn a living doing and still be so passionate about. I feel very blessed. I feel very fortunate to be able to do what I do. I believe that our ancestors have given each of us a mission. And I know what mine is to help make African people proud of themselves, because we are taught all over the world systematically to be anti-African. Sad to say, we are taught that in Africa itself. One of the issues that is going on in Africa right now is the use of skin bleaching creams. Somebody gave me an article just last week called Dying to be Pretty. D-Y-E-I-N-G, dying. Not physical, not in the physical death, but like you dye your hair. And in this case, it's about skin bleaching creams in Africa. We are taught in Africa, at least my experience most recently, in Southern Africa. I did a series of lectures in Namibia, and I taught at a series of teachers' colleges in Zimbabwe. I actually had a chance to go to some of the white-owned farms in Zimbabwe that Africans are occupying, and actually talk to some of the war veterans, and they made it very clear to me that they weren't giving up that land. May not even give it up if Mugabe asked them to give it up. That's how far the situation has gone. But in the teachers' colleges, they are taught, the young black teachers, that to embrace Africa is to embrace backwardness, and to embrace Europe is to embrace modernity. A lot of us who have not been to Africa have, I think, a very romantic, utopian vision of Africa. And when you go there, you find people worshiping white Jesus. You find, you wear African clothes and people look at you funny. You have an African name. In fact, my name Renoko is from Zimbabwe. And most of the people that you encounter are named Andrew and Mary. And we have a very different vision of Africa. Anyway, I'm very, very pleased to be here. I went to Australia last month. Doctors kind of advised me against it. And when I made up my mind and told them I was going no matter what, if I had to swim over there, I was going. They said, well, go anyway. And by the time the last day came of the trip, I actually scaled a 14,000-foot high cliff to see some Aboriginal rock art. So I am in a very good mood. I feel blessed. Like I have been giving my life back again. And I believe that, sisters and brothers, that within our hands, we have the ability to achieve a great and mighty victory. We can blame other people for our victimization, but you have to look to yourself for your liberation. And maybe that is a valuable lesson that I've gotten from this experience. So tonight we're going to do a slide presentation. I'm going to show you some pictures with the maxim that seeing is believing, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. Brother, would you feel like operating that? No, just forward and reverse. Now we can turn off the lights, please. Let's go to the first one. And I'll stand here out of the way. I see that the vendors have some very good stuff, very good items. I already have a copy of the 10 Commandments for the collective survival of African American males. I have a big thing for shea butter back there. I see some fantastic books. I already got 2 bean pies. So help support the sisters and brothers who are here. One more time, give a big round of applause for Reality Speaks. Now, tonight's presentation is designed to, and it's really wonderful to see so many children in the room tonight. That's refreshing. I'm doing this is a new presentation, and it's really the first time I've ever done it before. Okay? And it's something that I'm always trying to do something new. I'm always getting new kinds of images. I like to show pictures with the maxim, sisters and brothers, that seeing is believing and a picture is worth 1,000 words. That must come out in African context. And I'm trying to counter these notions of white supremacy. I guess that's really what we all are trying to do. And this presentation is therefore called The Beauty of Blackness. And I think it fits in very, very well with what we've already seen with the libation and introduction and the fashion show. So tonight's theme is the beauty of blackness. This is contrary to a lot of our thinking. A lot of us instinctively use words like fair skin and good hair in relationship to either white people or very light people. The expression I grew up with, I'm 48 years old, is if you're white, you're right. You heard this before? Yeah. If you're yellow, you're mellow. You know where I'm going with it. If you're red, go ahead. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're black, get back. I heard people say, Renoko, there's no such thing as an ugly white woman or a pretty bulldog. You ever heard that one before? And we use words like fair skin. I'm here to tell you, my skin is as fair as anybody. Because I have black skin. I'm proud of that. These are terms that we use a lot of times without really thinking about it. My job, I told you, I think the ancestors have given me a mission. Number 1 is to help make Africans proud of themselves. Number 2 is through my global travels. You know, my goal is to visit 65 different countries. I'm about halfway through, and to lecture in 40 countries. That's my goal. I've lectured now in 21 countries. The third part of it is helping us to engage in critical thinking. And that's what I want to do tonight. So I've done a lot of preaching. Let me show some slides and I'll comment on them as we go. Now, to begin the beauty of blackness, I guess we could go to our earliest identifiable human ancestor. And this, of course, are the remains or the fossils, the bones of a black woman, an African woman named Dinknesh. And that name means you are wonderful. These bones were found in the Hadar region of Ethiopia in 1974 by a native African. This is the brother that you see before you now. I'm planning on traveling to Ethiopia at the end of December, and I hope to see these bones myself. These bones are 3.4 to 3.5 million years old. Now, they are not our oldest ancestor, but our earliest clearly identifiable ancestor. For example, we know that these are the remains of an African woman because the pelvic area has remained largely intact. And we know basically how old these bones are through the use of potassium, argon, and thermoluminescent dating techniques. Very sophisticated. Now, just a couple of years ago, I remember I was in Australia at that time also. This was my third trip to Australia. Another set of bones were found in South Africa, and this time of an African man, a brother. And these bones were dated to about 200,000 years older than these. These bones, by the way, are sometimes referred to as Lucy. We try to use the African name whenever possible. But just a couple of months ago, another set of bones were found in Chad in North Central Africa. And they are dated to be 7 to 8 million years old. Africa is the birthplace of humanity. When I look at history, and I'm going to give a history lesson tonight, I'm looking at 3 broad phases. Number 1, that humanity began in Africa, that we are the original people of the planet, that all other people, even though we don't want to admit it sometimes, come from us. I just assumed white folks came from another planet. But as far as I know, they are our mutated offspring. And we might as well get comfortable with that. A lot of us have problems with the concept that Africa is the birthplace of humanity, because we are taught against see Africa in such a foul and vicious manner. Sometimes when I come back from Africa, I've been fortunate enough to visit Africa on 7 occasions, people ask me questions like Renoko, and they mean well. I'm talking about educated or miseducated African Americans. They say things like, Renoko, do they have cars in Africa? Do they have, I mean seriously, do they have cities in Africa? Some people even say, do they live in the trees in Africa? I have heard Africans born in Africa tell me that Renoko, at the university that I attended, African Americans would sometimes come up to them, and not just African Americans, white folks. And you know, white folks supposed to know everything. That's the rumor. Ask them, do you have a tail between your legs? And they say they mean well, they just ignorant. Now in a minute we're going to go to Egypt, and you know the expression they use in the Nile Valley in Africa, and that expression is ignorance is evil. In America we're taught that ignorance is bliss. A lot of us don't want the information, because with knowledge comes responsibility. And so many of us would prefer to close our minds like you close a door or you close a window for fear that a new idea might come in. So we have to educate our sisters and brothers about Africa, because I believe that we will never be free. I don't care what we do. I don't care how many Secretary of States we have. I don't care how many national security advisors they have. If you get my drift. I don't care how many Supreme Court justices that we have that are Sambos. We will never be free in this country until Africa is free. Now you might as well get comfortable with that. Just because a cat has babies in an oven, you don't call the babies biscuits. Just because you are born in a place does not determine your nationality and ethnicity. We are African people. We came from Africa, and we never stop being African, whether we like it or not. When I talk about freedom for Africa, understand what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a continental African union, where the resources of Africa are utilized for the masses of people. Peter Tosh has a song, the brother from Jamaica, and the words go something like, Africa is the richest place with the poorest race. Oh my, what a disgrace. And that is very profound. Peter Tosh also said, no matter where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. But we are taught to hate Africa. It's even been said by some of us, thank God for slavery, because at least it got us out of Africa. Now, we have a direct connection to the motherland. And I pointed out that Africa will never be free until we participate. And we will never be free until Africa is free. Africa desperately needs the resources and technology that we have to offer. But if you're going around thinking you're not an African, that you're an American, that this is your homeland, if you are going around calling yourself a Trinidadian, a Jamaican, a Bayesian, Puerto Rican, Dominican, African American, Nigerian, Congolese, Ethiopian, instead of an African, because these are basically artificial boundaries that have been imposed on us, you're going to have some real problems. So I want you to think very broadly tonight. Now let's go to the next slide. Now this takes us to the Nile Valley. So number one, the first phase, Africa, the birthplace of humanity. The second phase in our historical analysis is Africa, the birthplace of human culture and civilization. First folks to bury their dead. First people to engage in religious rituals. First people to develop a concept of art are Africans. But Africans are also the first people to live in cities, towns, and villages. They are the first people to develop writing systems or scripts. The first people to utilize metal weapons and tools. Okay? These are concepts that we associate with early and basic civilization. Metallurgy, writing systems, urbanization. And then the place in Africa that you have to look at most closely in terms of the development of civilization is the Nile Valley. Civilization, sisters and brothers, tend to develop along the banks of rivers because rivers by their very nature facilitate transportation, irrigation, and communication. And thus civilization itself is made possible. And there has never been a greater civilization that humanity has seen than the Nile Valley. It was special. And you have different countries in the Nile Valley. You have a country called Nubia. You have Ethiopia. This is a term developed by the Greeks. It means the land of the burnt-faced people. You have a place called Napata. You have a place called Meroe. You have the kingdom of Kush. You have a place called Tarseti, or the land of the bow. You have a place called Wawat. You have a place called the land of Yam. You just assume these are black people that we're talking about. But the most fabulous country in the Nile Valley in antiquity is called Kemet, or the Black City. Some people translate it to mean the Black Land. And we, in modern times, call it Egypt of the pharaohs, or dynastic Egypt. If you want to understand this area, Egypt or Kemet, you need a framework, and that framework is called a dynastic system. A dynasty is a family of rulers, one member of the family coming after the other for an extended period. And in ancient Egypt, or Egypt of the pharaohs, dynastic Egypt, you have 30 royal families. And this is where it began, deeper in the south, in the area that we now sometimes call Kush or Sudan. Let us imagine a body of water, and from this body flow different streams, and each one of those streams turned out to be a mighty nation state. And that's how the Nile Valley complex was. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because many people would prefer to detach Egypt from Africa. And so therefore you have expressions like Black Africa, or Africa south of the Sahara. Africa is one. It may be divided, it may be fragmented, but it is one. And perhaps the only good thing that came out of the transatlantic slave trade and the rape and colonization of Africa, because you must always look for something positive or you'll go crazy. You will lose your mind. You'll be consumed by hatred and insanity. Perhaps the only positive thing is since we don't know, most of us at least, don't know exactly what part of Africa we come from, we have the right to claim all of Africa. We say all of Africa belongs to us, from Cape Town to Cairo and from Somalia to Senegal. And we're going to look at a lot of that real estate tonight. This brother, or this god, this deity, is from Nubia. Next. This is Imhotep. Of course, most of you have heard of Imhotep. The name Imhotep means something like he who comes in peace, or the man of peace, the prince of peace. And why is he important? He is important to us because he is the world's first known multi-genius. He comes from the first golden age in world history. And this is the time of the beginning of the first pyramids. In fact, this brother designed the first pyramid. It is called the Step Pyramid, but it's also the world's first large stone building. He is known as the father of medicine. Thousands of years before Hippocrates, this brother is a practicing physician. He is a high priest. He's a magician. He is a poet. He gives us the expression, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Doesn't that sound like something a brother would say? But he is also a scribe. He's a writer. And later generations of scribes or writers in Kemet, before they would write something, they would spill a few drops of ink in honor of Imhotep. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and even today when a brother in one of the social organizations commonly called gangs dies, the survivors will spill a few drops from a 40-ounce bottle of something in commemoration of their fallen brother. This is Africa coming out of us. Africa is in us whether we like it or not, and it don't make a difference if you're born in Africa. You're not African because you're born in Africa. You're an African because Africa is born in you. And it's in everything you do. It's in the way you walk. It's in the way you talk. It certainly is in your sense of time. You know and I know that black folk have a very different sense of time. Average brother, if you tell him the program's going to start at 7, look for him at 7:45. That's all over the world. When I went to Australia, I'm at a program supposed to start at 7 o'clock, 7:45. Sisters and brothers start drifting in. I thought that was very unusual. I looked at my watch and confirmed that it was indeed 45 minutes from the time the program was supposed to start. I said, excuse me, but I was born in the United States, and we have a term we use called CP time. You all ever heard of that? They said, no, we never heard of it. The people in Australia never heard of it. I said, well, this is what it means. I broke it down. I said, do you all have a concept like it here? They said, yeah. Among the black people, yes. I said, what do you call it? They call it Abo time, as an Aboriginal time, right? I went to Fiji. Same thing. Talk to the brothers and sisters. They say they call this concept of time Fiji time or island time. A couple years ago, I'm doing a big series of presentations at the University of Missouri at Kansas City on the history of the Sudan. About an hour into the program, literally 40 Sudanese, I counted them, walked in the room, all at once. I said, excuse me, you all ever heard of CP time? They said, no. I said, I don't want to put you on the spot. Have you heard of Abo time? No. Have you heard of Fiji time? We never heard of it, Brother Renoko. I explained what it was. I said, do you have a concept like that in the Sudan? They said, yeah. I said, what do you call it? It's about time. I used to get angry growing up until recently. And I see black folk, black men in particular, covered with gold. 4 or 5 gold chains. Gold this, gold that, gold belt buckle. And I say, come on, aren't you being a little excessive? And then I saw pictures of the Ashanti from Ghana, covered with gold. These things are African, and they come out of us. We don't be planning it like that most of the time. A lot of us are not conscious of it. But it's like a race memory. Imhotep, after he died, thousands of years after he died, the people of Kemet or Egypt would ask themselves the question, could there be another like Imhotep? He is a shining example for what Africans can and should be. Because I believe that there's nothing that we can't do. But if you are indoctrinated with the belief that black people ain't nothing, ain't never been nothing, ain't gonna never be nothing, you're likely never to do anything significant with your life. And that's why I'm so pleased that the young people, the children, are here tonight. So they don't have to be like me. They don't have to be like most of us. They can get it when they're little and grow up with it. Imagine what you would be like at the age of 50 if you had gotten this indoctrination from the time you were an infant up to... You'd be a Superman or a Superwoman, and that is what we are trying to do. Develop a group of, not superhumans, but people who achieve their full potential in life. Let's go to the next slide. Now this takes us to the 10th dynasty. This is a time of internecine warfare in the Nile Valley. Egypt or Kemet has fallen on hard times. There's dissension in the land, and foreigners come in and take over. Just like what happens in our communities. Foreigners come in and take over, and we support those foreigners. We give them our money all the time. And we develop a kind of a pathological normalcy where it's almost like we expect people to dominate us. These are soldiers from Kush. I can tell where they are from because they have the bow and the arrow. If they were from Kemet or Egypt, they would have a javelin. Next. Here's a nice one. One of my favorites. This man's name is Nepheped-Ra-Mentuhotep II. And he is the, I guess you call him the restorer. His family, the Mentuhoteps, restored order back to this divided country. I mentioned that it's sometimes called Kemet, the Black Land or the Black City. And sometimes it's referred to as Ta-Meri or the Beloved Land, and sometimes it's called the Two Lands because from time immemorial, Egypt or Kemet is divided into a northern kingdom and southern kingdom. This brother came from the south, his family conquered the north and ushered in a time of great prosperity because the country was united. He is on the throne for 51 years. He is in the color of God. In ancient Egypt, black was considered to be the color of divinity. Can you imagine a time when black was the color of God? That's deep right there. See, I believe that God is black. Even the Bible says something to the effect that God created you in his own image, right? If you are black and God created you in his image or her image, then doesn't God in some sense, must he not also be black? Let me repeat. If God created you in his or her own image and you are black, then God must also be black. It stands to reason. I believe I see God whenever I look in the mirror because I know God is in me. God is not some far-off white man with blonde hair and blue eyes sitting on a throne somewhere doing you wrong. The way we grew up, even the angels are white. That's the 3 strikes law. This is the crown from the north, the red crown. The southern crown is a white crown. We know this brother is an ancestor because the beard is curled up and he's in the Osirian posture. I'll talk about Osiris as we go along next. Now this brother had 7 wives. The king had the prerogative of having numerous wives. And all of them were black women. Okay? It's quiet. All of them were black women. See, that's all I want in life, is a good sister. When I see a black man walking down the street with a white woman, I'm ashamed. I want to go confront that, but he's embarrassing me. Because black women have got to be the most beautiful things in the universe. Why would you accept that? As God is my witness, before I get a white woman, I'd rather have a goat, a sheep, a snake, anything. This is one of the wives right here. Next. And there's another one. Okay? And again, this is particularly important. This takes us back to about 2000 BC, roughly 4,000 years ago. Next. Now, this couple represents the 3rd golden age that we can identify in human history, and it's sometimes called, traditional Egyptologists call it the New Kingdom, and it's Egypt at its height, when black men and black women literally ruled the world. And this takes us back to the beginning of the 18th dynasty, about 1580 BC. This is Nefertari and Ahmose I, a king and queen seated on the throne. Because what good is a king without a queen? They go hand in hand. In ancient Kemet, the line of descent was traced to the female side of the family. And at the head of every dynasty sat an African woman. In order for the king to be a legitimate king, he had to marry the black woman in whom the royal bloodlines ran. So again, it shows the importance of African women from there. But it was the couple that was the ideal social unit. In many ways, this sister took on a greater importance than the brother, because she is painted in the color black. She was deified during her lifetime, and her name is Ahmose Nefertari. Let's go to the next one. And there she is again. This is in the British Museum. I've had a chance to travel to London and lecture on a number of occasions, and every time I go, I always go to the museum to look at these pieces because they're deteriorating. I guess as more and more people come to see them, the temperatures in the museums go up and the pieces begin to deteriorate. This is a fine black woman, black as the night and magnificent. She could have been in the fashion show a little while ago. She's got an ankh in her hand, the key of life, the symbol of male and female union. Next. This piece, or these 2 figures, I just saw these in D.C. Earlier today. There's a traveling exhibit called The Quest for Immortality. By the way, the people of the Nile Valley are the first people that we are aware of to talk about the concept of resurrection. They believed that if the Nile River could rise and fall again, if vegetation could rise and fall, so might human beings. But only if you practice Ma'at, the moral law of the universe, God's word. Ma'at embraces truth, justice, righteousness, balance, order, harmony, reciprocity. You could rise again, they thought, if you lived that life. Not talked about it, not went to church on Sunday and prayed a little while and then went out and sinned, but if it was a part of your lifestyle, if it was your manner of living, not talking, not philosophizing, but doing. Sometimes people ask me, Renoko, what was the original religion of ancient Africa? And I can't find one. Because it wasn't so much a religion, but it was a way of life. Deep spiritual practice. I am not a religious man, but I am a deeply spiritual man. And I look at Africa for my spiritual direction, because I'm an African. Africa is the birthplace of all the other major religions. But I want the real thing. I don't want an offshoot religion. I want the real deal. This is Cinnamon. And this is Makare Hatshepsut's daughter, Neferah. What I like about this in terms of this concept of the beauty of blackness is the tenderness that's displayed here, that I see in the room to some extent. Black men sometimes, it is said about us that we abandon our children, and I suppose we do sometimes. You know, I've never had that. I don't have any children. I'm too busy being a historian, right? But I have that experience. But here is a case of a black man protecting this child in a very tender fashion, and you get the impression that as long as that brother is holding that baby, nothing is going to happen to that child. I like that concept and what it portrays. Next. Now, this is the god Amun, or Amun, Aman. The name means the invisible one, the unseen one, the hidden one. This is where, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we get the term Amen. And it comes from a deity during the 18th dynasty who was merged with another deity named Ra. And as Amun Ra, they become more or less the king of the Kemetic pantheon, portrayed in the perfect black. This is about 3,450 years old. And what is so remarkable about it is not just the color itself, that black was the color of God, but also the fact that how bright and vivid the colors still remain even today. It is from the word kemet that we get the modern terms chemistry and chemical from, because obviously they knew something about the chemical composition of paint. Next. This is Queen Ty, or Tiye, or Queen T. We don't know the exact pronunciation because none of us really know what ancient Egyptians sounded like. We can only speculate and engage in conjecture. But this sister, again, the beauty of blackness has it personified here. Regal, reserved, very beautiful, very dignified. This is the mother of Akhenaten, the man who said that there's only one God, probably the author of the Book of Psalms, who inaugurated a revolution in art. She's the mother-in-law of Nefertiti. She's the mother of another king named Smenkhare, and the youngest son, King Tut. And this piece is only small enough basically to fit inside your hand. I've actually had a chance to see the artifact. It's made of wood, and it's coated with something that looks like plastic. Amazing. Next. It's hot in here, isn't it? Look at that one. Look at those exquisite braids. This is Ramos. If we take the Ra off of it and add an S to the end of the name, we have the term Moses. And this is Ramos and his wife and queen. He is the prime minister of Kemet, or Egypt, during the time of Akhenaten. And I had a chance to visit his tomb twice in 2001, and it was never finished. They never finished painting it, but I just can't get enough of that. Those exquisitely detailed braids. And I'll be willing to bet you that that's not Korean or Chinese hair. Next. Look at this one. Now this is a papyrus, which is where we get the modern word paper from. And you can see these sisters, these musicians, performing. One of them looks to me like Janet Jackson. And they look like a lot of sisters that we can identify. And this takes us back to 18th dynasty Egypt. On top, you can see the writing system, the Medu Neter, or divine speech. And let's compare that slide with the next one here. You see? This is a photograph I got 2 years ago in southern Africa, in Namibia. Basically the same motif. The same hair, same skin color, same everything. Next. This is King Taharka. Taharka is monarch of the 25th dynasty, which combined the Kushite, Nubian, and Kemite dominance over most of Africa and much of the world itself for that matter. King Taharka is the most important of the 25th dynasty kings. He comes to us about 675 BC. He's mentioned in the Bible 3 times. He's mentioned in the book of Kings, I think the second book of Kings, and Isaiah. Next. This is from, I took this photograph last year, again in the British Museum. This is a high official from the 26th dynasty. We've gone all the way from the time of Imhotep in Dynasty 3, sketching the dynasties quickly, and now we're down towards the end of the dynastic system. Dr. John Henry Clark, one of our greatest scholars, referred to this period as our last great walk in the sun. Now, you see on this one and on some of the others, the nose is missing. You just saw it on Taharka a moment ago. And there are 3 explanations given for that. One is that the Egyptians believed that the seed or essence of life was contained in the nose, and if you were to knock off the nose on the statue, you would destroy that person's soul or essence. I don't buy that. Another explanation is these are mighty old statues, and if you fall on your face and you're 4,000 years old and you made of stone and you got a big old nose like yours and mine, you're going to suffer some damage. That's probably true. But Chancellor Williams, in this magnificent book, The Destruction of Black Civilizations, a book that just turned my life upside down, he came to the conclusion, based on a systematic survey, that was done deliberately. That later invaders came into the country, took a hammer and chisel, and that is why those monuments look like they do today. Next. This is out of sequence. This should have been a few hundred years earlier. This is Ramses the Great, Usamari Ramses II, and I guess you could call him great because he had between 150 and 300 children. He had as many children as you have Egyptian tour guides to tell the story. I guess you could say what made him great is that he took care of every one of them. He's on the throne for 67 years. He lived to be 99 years old. He is a great warrior. He is a great builder. And you can see the comparison here between the 19th dynasty depiction of Ramses, that piece is now in the Turin Museum in Italy, and the black man from Central Africa, a Tutsi. You may have heard of the Watutsi or Tutsis. That's a Tutsi right there, and this is from Sheikh Anta Diop's book, African Origin of Civilization, World's Great Men of Color. Y'all still with me? Yes. Next slide. Now this, again, I love to talk about black women. And I'm not the only one. Alexander Dumas, the black man who wrote The Three Musketeers, The Man in the Iron Mask, The Count of Monte Cristo, used to say that a man's mind is elevated to the status of the women with whom he associates. I like that. Okay? I have great respect for black women. Can't say enough about you all. Give them a round of applause. This sister is a Kintaka, K-E-N-T-A-K-E, or Queen Mother. She comes from Meroe, one of the other galaxy of Nile Valley nations. And here this black woman who is not only the head of state of her country, she's also the commander-in-chief of the army, leading her troops into war successfully against the Romans in the time of Augustus Caesar, and that's her son in the background. This was a time when black women sometimes ruled entire nations with unquestioned authority. You've heard of the Queen of Sheba. They were not isolated phenomenon. Other black women who fit a mold similar to that would be Queen Nzinga from the Congo, Yaa Asantewaa from Ghana, Harriet Tubman from the United States. Next slide. Now, this here, I hope I have it. This is Sheikh Anta Diop in the middle. So it looks like an ancient Egyptian statue in the sense that he has those ears. The Egyptians believed that they would mold statues, the larger the ears, the more intelligent you would be, because you could hear more. And on the other side, and Diop's important too in this context of Beauty of Blackness. He is sometimes called the Pharaoh of Nile Valley Studies. In 1974, there was a big conference in Cairo, sponsored by UNESCO, on the origins of Egyptian civilization. And supposedly some of the greatest scholars in the world were invited to speak at this particular conference, to talk about who they thought developed Nile Valley civilization, or specifically Egyptian civilization. And of course, most of the people said white folks did. A mysterious group of white people, they argued, came from somewhere and went to Africa and built the pyramids. Some people have even argued that that extraterrestrials came down. Anything but an African, right? Because modern Egyptology began at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. And so this was a time when Egypt was, in a sense, artificially taken out of Africa. Our history was taken away. How else do you make a good slave? Willie Lynch would argue. One thing you must do is take away the history and convince the enslaved African, because you know slaves didn't come from Africa anyway. Africans came from Africa. They were captured and enslaved. I am not the descendant of slaves. Neither are you. The word slave is rooted in the term Slav. It ain't got nothing to do with black folk. At any rate, this is the height of the transatlantic slave trade. And so you begin to have these hypotheses about non-Africans building Egyptian civilization. Sometimes they're referred to as Hamites, or black-skinned white people, right? A lot of foolishness. And Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophile Obenga from the Congo laid it out. Diop, by this time, had developed a melanin dosage test. You could take samples from the epidermis of the skin, scrape off a few centimeters, put it in a solution under a microscope, and turn a light on, and you can see the melanin or blackness gleaming right back at you. That should solve it right there. He talked about eyewitness accounts that people came to Egypt and described them as having black skin and woolly hair. The biblical evidence, skeletal remains, cultural evidence, the study of blood types, DNA. One guy got so angry at this barrage of information that he jumped up in frustration and exasperation, says, even if you can prove the ancient Egyptians were black, they were still white. That's the level of insanity that we did. And that's why I don't argue with people. You want to believe that? Go right on. Let me talk to some people with some open minds and some common sense. And then next to him, closest to me, is a young-looking Dr. Charles Finch. Now, whenever you see Charles, you got on all African clothes. And Ivan Van Sertima at the end. Ivan is not doing very well. He's suffering from Alzheimer's and is progressing. And Ivan has been one of our greatest living scholars and certainly a mentor of mine. Next. This is Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. I understand that Dr. Ben was just recently here. Yes. And Dr. Clark is one of our most revered ancestors. When Dr. Clark died, it was like a prince had died. And a prince did die. A king. 5,000-6,000 people came to his funeral. You know, Dr. Clark's one of the few people that I know who wrote his own obituary. His widow told me that the night before he passed, he sensed what was happening, and he transcribed his obituary. I read it's bad, just like the rest of them. 5-6 pages. He talked about Pan-Africanism and Marcus Garvey in his obituary. He's talking about the women in his life. He tells his widow, or his soon-to-be widow, when you in the springtime, when you feel a soft breeze blow across your face, that's me telling you how much I love you and how much you meant to me. That's deep. And then in the late 1950s, he wrote a book, a small booklet, a short story, called The Boy Who Painted Christ Black. And at the end of the obituary, I mean, it's sad in some ways, because I love that man. I still do. I think about him all the time, like a father of mine. He says, and I must go now, because I see Christ and Kwame Nkrumah coming towards me. And oh, by the way, Christ is black. That's the way the obituary ends. That was Dr. Clark. Dr. Ben has probably done more to popularize our knowledge of Egypt than any living scholar. He's actually taken people to Kemet. I've been to Egypt with him 4 times. And showed them the still visible splendors of the black man of the Nile. Next slide. And that speaking of Christ being black. That's what I wanted to end our segment on the Nile Valley with. This is a very rare photograph. I don't know if I have to even tell you who that is, or who that purports to be. I will tell you that it's 1,800 years old. That I found it, the ancestors guided me to this in Egypt in March of 2001 in the Coptic Museum. I'd never been in the Coptic Museum before on all of my 6 trips to Egypt, and I didn't plan to go that day. I was the lecturer for the group. I never had to pay to go to Egypt. 6 times. 4 times I went to work with Dr. Ben, and 2 other times I went just to lecture on 5-star cruise ships on the Nile. All expense-paid trips. I know I have a tough life, but somebody has to do these things. I know you feel sorry for me. And I did. And so when you're a lecturer, you don't have to be with the group unless you're lecturing. But I decided to hang out with these 85 black folks from Los Angeles, a radio station called I mentioned Front Page. I mentioned the station's called KJLA. It's owned by Stevie Wonder. And every year for the last 5-6 years, they sponsor a trip to Africa. They've been to Ghana 2 or 3 times. They've been to South Africa. They've been to Senegal. They've been to Gambia, I think the Ivory Coast. Last year they went to Egypt, and they selected me to go lecture with them. So I'm in the museum, the Coptic Museum. The Copts are an early branch of Christians. And I'm walking around with a camera. A museum attendant says, you can't have a camera. I gave him $1. He said, okay. I saw this picture. I said, I want to take this. If you give me another $1, you can use the flash. And therefore, I got that photograph of Jesus the Christ with a nice, natural afro, whatever you want to call it, halo over his head. You can even see, if you look closely, the blood on his palms and the top of his hand when he was nailed to the cross, and all of the disciples black. I've seen images of the black Christ before, but this is by far the most comprehensive and detailed. Now, you are indoctrinated to be a Christian, most of us in this society. I know I was. I grew up a Pentecostal. We would go to church sometimes 6-7 times a week. You know what I'm saying? I'll never forget that. From like 7 in the evening to 11:30, 12 o'clock. People would speak in tongues. They would shout. They would dance. It was like a party. That's how I grew up. But I never heard anything about the possibility of Christ being black until I was 30-some years old. So take a good look at that. Now let's move to some other parts of the world. Next. This is outside of the Nile. Well, not outside of the Nile Valley. This sister is from Sudan, southern Sudan, where Africans are enslaved today by Arabs. And some Arabs themselves are black people. The original Arabs are black. Can't get away from that. The lineage of the Prophet Muhammad is African. Muhammad's grandfather is described as black as the night and magnificent. He fathered 10 sons, each of whom are described as black as the night and magnificent. One of them is Abdallah, the father of the Prophet. In the early stages of Islam, Muhammad was advised to send his closest followers across the Red Sea from Arabia to Ethiopia, to Africa. He was told, if you look to Ethiopia, the land of the burnt-faced people, there you will find a king under whom no man is persecuted. It is a land where God will bring you rest from all of your afflictions, and the earliest Muslims went there. And when they came back to Arabia, Muhammad was so impressed that he said that he who brings an Ethiopian man or an Ethiopian woman into his house brings the blessings of God there. First Muslim to die in battle is a black man. Black imams, black muftis. Muhammad's closest companion is Bilal. According to the great African scholar J. Rogers, the brother from Jamaica, he said in one of his books, he's paraphrasing, the prophet is supposed to have told Bilal, last night, Bilal, I dreamed I went to paradise, and I found that you had been there before me. So African people play a very prominent role in Islam and Arabia, but in southern Sudan, the enslavement of our people is still going on. Same thing in Mauritania. And this sister is a southern Sudanese. Now, I do not show this picture very frequently. I do a lot of presentations in public schools. I know I've done well over 1,000 presentations by now in the last 25 years or so. But I don't show this one in schools very often because when I do, the children said, she's so black. She's so ugly. And that just takes all the wind out of my sails. I don't even want to go on after that. Because we have internalized our enemy's standard of beauty. Somebody says, Dr. Wade Noble, something to the effect that the essence of power is the ability to define someone's reality and make you live according to that definition. And this happens all the time. People have told us what it means to be successful. To live in a vanilla suburb where people don't want you. To marry a white woman or a white man. What it means to be beautiful. So we have a standard of beauty more often than not that causes us to despise ourselves. Sometimes I hear black people say, I'm not really black. My great-grandmother was Irish. My grandfather was French. My so-and-so was Russian. How did you get that family tree? Most of the time it was from rape. So when we talk about this fair-skinned BS, we are celebrating the rapists within our family tree. You understand what I'm saying? These are things I want you to think about. Because all of us, or most of us, have done that. And some of us still do it. I grew up that way. When I was a kid, if you called me black, those are fighting words. And damn sure don't call me an African. Because I didn't know any better. Now if you call me an African, we're going to be friends for a long time. Because that's the greatest compliment you can give me. I'm so proud to be an African, I don't know what to do. I'd rather be an African today than a Greek in the time of Alexander, a Roman in the time of the Caesars, a Frenchman in the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. And as God and the ancestors are my witness, may my last words on this earth be, long live Africa, I'm so proud to be an African. But we have a lot of work to do, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. I believe we're going to win. I believe we're walking on a victorious path. At least I want to believe it. But what I don't see for the most part is a sense of urgency. I see complacency, and that worries me. Next. Look at that smile. Next. These are serious melanated black people who live in the Horn of Africa. Next. This sister's from Djibouti. On the images I've shown you, the last 3 or 4 are from Sudan, southern Ethiopia, and Djibouti. Next. This is my little pinup girl here. I took this photograph in a village in Zambia a couple years ago. Little bitty girl, just so happy for me to photograph her. You know, before I went to I'd been going to Egypt all the time. Before I went to Southern Africa, I used to have these nightmares, these dreams. 2 of them. And I want to share them with you briefly. One was I would dream that I couldn't find my house. I would be in my neighborhood. I know I live around here somewhere, and I'd go down this street and that street, and I couldn't find my house. And I would wake up in a cold sweat. It was not really a nightmare, but like a Twilight Zone kind of vibe. Well, I know I live around here, but I can't find it. And it was frightening. And then I would dream that I would go to visit my family in Los Angeles, who I love very much and who loves me, and they wouldn't want me to be there. They would make me sleep on the floor, wouldn't eat with me, would laugh at me. And I had those dreams for 20 years maybe. And then I went to Southern Africa, and I realized that those dreams had more depth than I realized. And I came to believe that because that they were rooted in our experience, that we don't really know where our family is and who our family is sometimes from a historical perspective. You understand? Right. That there's a sense sometimes of alienation from our family. That many of us, most of us, perhaps all of us, have never really been able to grieve for what happened to us. A couple years ago, I'm at a seminar in New York, and they had all these scholars speaking about the transatlantic slave trade, the Ma'afa. And a lot of these were white scholars, and they would refer to the enslaved Africans as merchandise and commodities. And they had a question and answer period, and sisters in particular, older women, will come and they would break down and say, those were our children. They weren't commodities. And I realized that we have never really been allowed to grieve for what we have gone through. And the other part about it was, again, not knowing what part of Africa I came from, not knowing where my home was. And I would tell those stories whenever I gave a presentation in Africa, and I would come very close to breaking down and crying. You know, I'm a very serious man, but I'm a very sensitive brother too. And maybe that's why I do what I do, because I'm sensitive to our oppression. I can't just pretend that things aren't happening like that. I have to do something about that. I can't look the other way. And I would tell those stories, and I would really break down. And the audience would break down. And they would say, but Renoka, we're your family. And this is your home. And I've never had those dreams since, because I had that cleansing process. This is also from Zimbabwe. That's a nice picture right there. Sister carrying her child. But that's a big old boy. That kid should be walking. But you know, if he's happy and she's happy, I'm happy too. Next slide. Now this takes us out of Africa. And we're African-centered, so let's go around the world, but keep our focus on Africa. This is from ancient India, actually Pakistan. And I call this photograph my old lady, because she's 4,000 years old. And she's clearly black. Not only does she look black, is the statue black, but look at that hand on her hip. I'm telling you, it's like it's genetic or something like that. Some things just don't change. I told you, you're not African because you're born in Africa. You're African because Africa is born in you. You know, in India, there are more black folk in that country than any other country in the world. India has the largest concentration of black people of any one country on earth. And a lot of them are in a social economic category called untouchability. That means they are taught through Hinduism that their very touch is considered polluting or contaminating to other people. There are more untouchables in India than the combined populations of England, France, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Germany put together. And they are the most oppressed people in the world. This is from ancient India. Next. And these are Jain statues. You see, one has a missing head, and just like Kemet, the other one has a missing nose. The Jains are forerunners of the Buddhists. Look at the head. Next. This is from the temple in a place called Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya is the city that grew up around the Bodhi tree. According to tradition, Gautama Siddhartha, or Siddhartha Gautama, a prince from Bihar in northern India, was in search of enlightenment and couldn't find it. He looked here and there. He talked to this elder, that elder. And finally, he sat under a Bodhi tree, and enlightenment came to him. He found his mission and purpose in life. So I had a chance to go there. I sat under the Bodhi tree, but I didn't get any enlightenment. But I did get this photograph right here. This black statue of the Buddha inside this magnificent temple by the Bodhi tree. Godfrey Higgins, who wrote a book called Anacalypsis, some of you may be familiar with it. It was published in 1836. An Englishman, not an African, who didn't have a point to prove but was just engaged in pure scholarship, concluded after 20 years of research on this book that he found something black whenever he approached the origins of nations and religions. Next. Do you know that in the Congo, in the 15th and 16th century, when a child was born, the blackest child was considered the most beautiful child. And if a child wasn't so black, the Congolese people would put ointment on them and put them in the sun to make them black. In India, and when they saw white people, they would run screaming in terror, because they'd never seen a monstrosity like that today. And I don't hate white folks. If I did, I wouldn't be ashamed to say it. But I just love black people so much. See, this isn't about being against anybody. It's about loving ourselves and appreciating who we are. Because if we don't appreciate ourselves, who else is going to do it? White folks might. Because they want everything you got. They just don't want you. Now, same thing in India. We'll get to that in a minute. We're in India, but I'll get to that particular phase. This is a Muslim brother. This is Malik Ambar. He was enslaved, he converted to Islam, and he becomes a king in the West Indian state of Gujarat. He is a part of a group of black people called Siddhis, or princes. And they had a particular function. They were soldiers and warriors, which Africans have to be on one level or another, because we are in a fight for our lives. We are an endangered species. What they would do is they would guard the ships of Muslim pilgrims coming from India to the cities of Mecca and Medina. And they had such a reputation that if word got out that one of these Siddhis was aboard these ships, no pirate would come anywhere close to that ship. The head of the Siddhis was known as the Admiral of the Indian Ocean and received an annual stipend of 300,000 rupees. This is Malik Ambar. This is a painting in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Next. This is a black goddess from Eastern India. This is how the black people in that part of India worship God in the form of a black female. I got no problem with that. Next. These are black people in India in modern times. This sister is a Dravidian. She is from South Central India. The black folk over there tend to have straight to wavy hair. And when I go there among them, they look at my beard and say, "You have good hair. I wish mine was like that." Next. Next. Now here I am with the blackest person I had seen up to that time in my life. Marco Polo went to India in 1288, southern India, 1288 and 1293, and he said that here when a child is born, they anoint him once a week with oil of sesame, for this makes him grow much darker than when he was born. For I assure you that here the gods and the saints are portrayed as black and the devil as white as snow. That's in 13th century India. I saw this brother among a group of other tribal people, and I had never seen anybody that black before. I couldn't take my eyes off that brother. We all in my group staring at him, and he's staring at us. And nobody said a word. We didn't have to. Because what I was thinking was, damn, that brother is black. And he was saying, yeah, I'm black, don't I look good? Okay, so I was able to take a photograph with the brother. Now look, that's a black man there, with a big old smile on his face. That fair-skinned brother. These are black women from Bengal. They're Santal. Look at the little sister down there in the red dress. From Bangladesh. Next. This takes us to the Andaman Islands in the Bay of Bengal. A black couple who look so happy to be together, because what good is a king without a queen? Next. This takes us to Cambodia. Now this is my next big tour. You can still go if you want to. We're leaving on November the 19th. We go to Cambodia, Thailand, and Burma in search of African people. It's a temple tour. This is Angkor Wat, the most magnificent temple in mainland Southeast Asia. The water is said to represent the celestial oceans, and the outer wall is supposed to represent the mountains of the world. Next slide. This is a close-up picture. In the center is supposed to be the dwelling place of the gods, a place called Mount Meru. In ancient times, this monument built by a group of black people called Khmers, and they are part of an empire called the Empire of Angkor in Cambodia. I visited in 1999, and I can't wait to go back. A trip to the center of Angkor Wat was considered a metaphorical trip to the center of the universe. Next. Now this is the next level. And I went all the way to the top, just to the door of the Holy of Holies. Next. And that's how they worship God there. And they bow down and pray before that deity. Asians do. Broad nose, full lips. Good hair. Next. There's another one right in the same complex. So when I travel, this is what I'm looking for. Either I'm looking for some live black people or some images of black people. And I would love for you to travel with me. I've had chances now to take groups to India, twice to Australia, now Southeast Asia. Next year we go to Fiji. And the year after that we go to Moorish Spain. Next. This is an apsara. These images like this are outside of the temple walls. Beautiful black women, braided hair, but the nose is missing. But those beautiful full lips. Next. All from Cambodia. This is from a place called TheBeauty. It reminds me of the Olmec heads in Mexico. Look at those lips. The lips don't lie. The words may be false, but the lips don't lie. Look at that big full nose that a lot of us are ashamed of. Next. We used to use, when I was a little kid, what is it? Natanola? Look at that hair. Next. This is from Vietnam. They would say, and the Chinese would ask these people about their culture, and they would say that for the complexion of the men, we consider black to be the most beautiful. In all the kingdoms of the South, it is the same. This is a Buddha from 9th century Vietnam. Look at that. Next. And this is a sister from Vietnam in the 20th century. So you have an indigenous black population in these parts of the world. Now the Viets, the Asiatic-looking people, or the people who look like Chinese, are new to the territory. Next. And there's a whole crew of black people from central Vietnam. These are not the offspring, these are not Amerasians. These are the original people of Vietnam. If you know brothers that were in the Vietnamese War, I know when you go to Vietnam and you talk to the Vietnamese, they call it the American War. They don't call it the Vietnamese War. You possibly would have encountered people like this in the central highlands of Vietnam, near Da Nang. Next. From Thailand. Next. Next. And there's another one. Of course, I've been told that that's really not a black person's hair. Those are little snails that crawl up on top of his head to protect him from the sun. Next. This is from Burma. In an area of 16 square miles, you have 5,000 temples. In the 16 square mile area, you have the remains of 5,000 temples. And I tried to go in as many of them as possible. I went there by myself last year, and some of these places where I've been to, just your presence alone will stop traffic. You've never seen black people like us before, or at least not in modern times. But when you go inside the temples next, these are the kind of images that you see that are 1,000 years old. A black man with a TWA, a teeny weeny afro. Okay? That's what you see. Next. From the Philippines. These are the indigenous people. We're the original people all over the place. I mentioned 2 phases, and I never got to the third. One is we're the original people. Second is we introduced civilization. And the third phase is the enslavement process, the enslavement period. Problem is, we have 2 problems with that. Most of the time we begin or look at our history, we begin with slavery. When I went to the university, California State University at Northridge, and later UCLA in Southern California, the book we had in the Pan-African Studies Department was From Slavery to Freedom. As if we didn't have anything before slavery. It's wrong on both accounts. First of all, our history doesn't begin with slavery, and we damn sure ain't free. So the title is messed up. But even if we look at enslavement, and it's important that we do so, let us look at it from the perspective of the enslaved Africans. Those Africans who fought in the face of overwhelming odds to maintain their basic humanity, who engaged in resistance every day. I'm proud of that. But the image of the foot shuffling, cotton picking, watermelon eating, chicken stealing enslaved African, that's not going to inspire you. Malcolm X used to say, cotton picking don't move me. But he also said, of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. All strong people emphasize their history all the time. Weak people do not. And we don't wait for somebody, if we're to be strong people, for white folks or other people to tell us it's okay. We seize the initiative. That's one thing I like about the reparations movement and the African studies movement. It shows we are still alive, that we are not looking for other people to give us their stamp of approval, that we know what we must do for ourselves, in spite of all the mistakes we make. From the Philippines, next. that brother. He looked like he could be from Southeast DC. From the Philippines. Next. From China. Look at those big noses. These are representatives of the Shang dynasty. The people that came after the Shang, they're the first historical dynasty in China, described them as having black and oily skin. Next. When I went to China, I couldn't find any evidence of that. I went to China last year. I've been really fortunate to travel because you see so many things when you travel that you can't find in a book. This is a black man in 15th century China. Look who's in the dominant position. Next. A black man from 15th century Mongolia. In the Far East, in the Orient. Next. From Japan, a Japanese deity, black. You know that the first military ruler in Japan, the so-called shogun, was a black man. We know that you have two Japanese proverbs that suggest ethnicity. One says, for a samurai to be brave, you must have a bit of black blood. Another one says, to make a good samurai, half the blood in one's veins must be black. The beauty, the power, the majesty of blackness. Next. From Japan. Powerful, isn't it? Next. Australia. The black fellas. They don't like to be called aborigines. They call themselves black fellas. Not fellows. They speak Ebonics too. Black fellas. And they have local names like Bama, Kuri, Muris, Noongar. They are characterized as having black skin and straight to wavy hair. For the first time, I encountered groups of them on my last trip who said we all come from Africa. I never thought I would hear that. All the indigenous people I talked to in Australia up to that point said we've always been here. Now they're starting to say we come from Africa too. Black-skinned people with straight to wavy hair, sometimes blonde and red hair. This brother's an ancestor now. His name is Bill Neatley from the north. I had a chance to spend some time with his sister, who told me about the stolen generations. This was the time when white Christian missionaries called chief protectors had the right to go into a black family's home and take the children away and raise them like slaves. And, you know, everybody in Australia, all the black people have been affected by the stolen generations. They've never received an apology like us. They've never gotten reparations like us. Although I understand some of us did get 40 acres and a mule, not me. Okay? And they would all break down and cry when they tell you about the stories. Today in Australia, a black man's life expectancy is only 37 years of age. In 1998, when I went there, it was 42 years. Now it's 37. A black man in Australia, black people in Australia make up about 3% of the total population. And yet black men in Australia make up 85 to 90% of the prison population. Next. And these were great and mighty people. They've been there 120,000 years in some cases, and they lived in peace and harmony until the white man came and almost exterminated them. Next. Her name is Mum Cheryl, and she's considered like a black saint in Australia because she's adopted so many abandoned children. They have lots of problems with black folk in Australia. Domestic abuse, substance abuse, because the oppression is so severe. One of the trends right now is for young brothers to siphon gasoline from an automobile and sniff the fumes. You can imagine the brain damage that would ensue. Next. These are all black folk from Australia. Next. They remind me of Venus and Serena Williams. I have high hopes for those sisters. Although Serena needs to get rid of that blonde hair. Next. Don't say anything about the boyfriend. I didn't hear that. I don't even want to hear it. Please, spare me. Allow me to be at blissful ignorance, okay, for a minute. Hopefully it's a passing phase. They're experimenting. This is a black child from the north. Next. They were only considered humans for the first time by the government in 1967. Before 1967, they were considered flora and fauna. It was not a crime to shoot a black person. Perfect innocence. Never saw a European before in all likelihood. Next. I got this one on a postcard in Australia. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't she beautiful? That's our future. Next. This child is undergoing a rites of passage. Among Aboriginal people, white is considered the color of death. And they also believe that when you die, you should not speak the name of your ancestors for 5 years, because that will not allow the ancestor to rest. They have a very different worldview. For example, we couldn't find ancient cities in Australia. And we said, well, you know, we've been to Egypt, we've been to Zimbabwe, we don't see any ancient cities here. They say, we are custodians of the land. We're the caretakers of the earth. We consider the earth to be our mother. Why, therefore, will we build a city on top of our mother? And they would present it in such a way, you say, you know, I never thought about it like that before. It makes sense. And they live in harmony with the world, with nature. They have a way of fishing. First they pray. And then they go to a water hole where they expect fish to be. And then they build a dam so water ceases to flow into the water hole. And then they would put a non-toxic substance in the water and would make the fish drunk, get the fish high. The fish would float to the top, and they would just take the ones they wanted. They wouldn't take too many. They would just take what they needed for that day. And then they would undam the water hole, so fresh water would flush the substance out, and they were going about their business. Next. And they say sovereignty never ceded. These are their national colors. Black for the people, beauty of blackness. Gold for the sun, red for the land, because they said the land is covered with their blood. You know, in 1788, Australia was, at least much of Australia, was established as a British prison settlement. And they were almost exterminated. But they say that I was with them in 1998 for the first time in a place called The Block in Redfern in Sydney, the Harlem of Australia. And I'm talking to about 15 indigenous people, and we're all talking at the same time. Everybody. And I asked them, I said, look, do you all believe you have a destiny? Because I told them, I don't think we came out of that door of no return without a mission. And I said, do you believe you have one? They said, yeah. What is it? To have one last dust-up with the white man to get their land back. A dust-up is a big fight. Next. From Bathurst Island, this brother's from a group called the Tiwi. The Tiwi are the only people I know of in that part of the world who have their own writing system. When they meet you, they say Jambo. And when they invite you to their house, they be playing reggae music. They love reggae. They have their hair locked up a lot of times. And they be listening to Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, and Lucky Dubé, and occasionally Bob Marley. Next. This is a brother from Tasmania. All of the full-blooded Tasmanians were murdered by Europeans. Tasmania is a real place. Next. From Indonesia. Next. From New Guinea. Does he remind you of anybody? Miles. All he needs is a trumpet. He'd be Miles. From New Guinea. Next. From New Guinea. Beautiful black woman and her child. Next. From Vanuatu in the Pacific Islands. Next. And this is a beautiful black woman from the Solomon Islands. I wish I was that black. Next. This sister from Fiji. That's where we're going next year. The people from Fiji say they come from Africa. I go in a Fijian village and I say, excuse me, I'm asking the chief, where are you all from? And he looked at me and said, same place you from. Where you from? And I feel kind of stupid. And I said, well, I was born in America, but my ancestors come from Africa. You come from Africa? I said, yeah. We come from Africa too. Have you been to Africa, brother and uncle? Yeah. Well, come tell us about it. Sit down next to me and tell us what Africa's like, because we want to go. Because we've been told we come from Tanganyika, from Egypt, from South Africa. They said we speak an African language. And if white folks are around, they look at them and say, you know, we come from Africa. And we speak an African language. And we used to eat a lot of white people. But we had to stop because the meat was bad. And it made us sick. And now we know better. And the white people just turned red. And I said, tell them some more. It sounds like an interesting story. And they would tell them some more. Now, I did have one odd experience in Fiji I'd like to tell you about. I had many of them, really. But I'll only tell you one. I got to drinking the local drink. Everybody drinks this called kava. They even sell it in the United States. Pharmaceuticals are really into it now. It's K-A-V-A. And kava is the roots of a pepper tree that's allowed to get 5 to 7 years old. And when it gets that old, you take it out and you pound the roots into powder. And you put it in a rag or a cloth, and you dip it in what's called, I think, clear water, pure water. And you massage the kava in there until it looks kind of muddy. And then you have a kava ceremony and you drink it. They say bula, everybody say bula. Bula. And then you drink kava until you can't drink it anymore. It's not alcoholic, but it does give you a little buzz. And I would drink so much of it, I'd be just shaking sometimes, but everybody else was drinking it. And the chief would tell me to drink it. So it became a thing. Everybody drank it. They insisted that I take kava back to the United States with me. So one night I went to buy some kava. I was hanging out with these brothers who worked in the hotel. And usually they would go get the kava. I would pay for it because I had more money than they did. So one night I couldn't wait. I just wanted to walk. After you've been in the country for a while, you feel like you know your way around. So I went to the store to get the kava myself. Imagine being out on a country road and there's a little store like a local 7-Eleven. And there you are walking to get some kava. And I went in there and for some reason I was very shy that night. And I said, can I get some kava? Brother who ran the store said, what? I said, kava. I said, what? I said, kava. And so there was a young brother, about 19 years of age, and he was on something that wasn't kava. He was, really nervous and stuff. Very agitated. He says, he wants some kava. And I said, yeah, that's what I want. And so the brother said, oh, okay, I'll get it for you. And so the young brother was looking at me. He said, where are you from? I said, I'm from the U.S. He said, are you a nigger? I couldn't believe it. Now, I don't know what rationale you use for that term, because I think there's no excuse to use it. A lot of our people died to keep that term from being used. And you may say it's a term of endearment. I don't buy that. When I was growing up, that was a fighting word. And there I am in the South Pacific at night, and somebody says, are you a nigger? No, I really thought we were going to fight. And I regrouped and got a hold of myself. I practiced anger management. And I finally said, no, I'm not. Are you one? He said, no, but I'm trying to be one. He meant that as a compliment. And it shows, in a sense, how the media sends negative images of African people around the world. Next. That sister looks a little bit like Jill Scott there. This is a black woman from Fiji also, but she's an East Indian. Next. This is the king of Hawaii, first known king of Hawaii, Kamehameha I. Next. And this is a sister from Hawaii in the 19th century. Next. This is from ancient Greece. This is a depiction of the Greek goddess Pallas Athena. She is the patron goddess of the Greek city of Athens, the most important city in the whole history of Greece. She is the goddess of warfare, but she's also the goddess of the intellect. Pallas Athena. Next. A black man from Greece, ancient Greece, nice hairstyle. Next. A brother from ancient Rome. You have black popes. You have African emperors in Rome. You had, by the 2nd century AD, 1/3 of all the members of the Roman Senate were born in Africa. Next. A Moor. Moors, of course, are black people from North Africa who fought the Arabs, who invaded Africa, and who took Islam into Europe. Introduced algebra. Introduced paved streets. Introduced street lights. Introduced air conditioning. Introduced soap to those funky white people in Europe. Said, this is called hygiene. Introduced the whole concept of chivalry. The Moors are described as black as pitch, black as a burnt brand, black as a crow, black as a raven. Nothing white about them but their teeth. And they dominated southern Spain, Portugal, and parts of France for almost 800 years. Moorish Spain. Next. These are Moorish noblemen in Spain playing chess with a white slave servant. I think chess is a game invented by black people. I think it has roots in Africa. The reason for that, I think, is the importance of the queen. Now, if you play chess, you know the object is to checkmate the king, but the king is old and slow, can't get around much anymore, kind of helpless. The most powerful piece on the board is the queen. I'm the sort of person, when I play chess, if I lose my queen, I just knock the pieces off and say, let's start another game, because my queen is gone. In Europe, the woman was nothing. In the history of Europe, the female was nothing. She had no value after childbirth. That's why you have this expression, a dog is a man's best friend. And you're going around calling your buddy dog today, without thinking about what you're even saying. Think. Don't just act on emotion. And once you think, act. It's not enough just to feel good and poke your chest out, an ego trip. You must act. Kwame Nkrumah said, thought without practice is empty, and action without thought is blind. You must be a thinker and a doer. Every African in this room should belong to at least one organization, whatever it is. Sometimes, sisters and brothers, we act like we're passive bystanders on the stage of history. We're waiting for a leader to come and tell us what to do. You better stop waiting and look at yourself. The world will pass you by. Next. And there's a depiction of a Moorish chieftain. All the sisters love that. Next. A black knight from Germany. That's Saint Maurice. The name Maurice means like a Moor. He is a Moor who has adopted Christianity. And he was the most important figure in the Holy Roman Germanic Empire. Next. Another depiction from Germany of Saint Maurice. Next. This is a black knight from medieval France. Is that Sekhmet? Dr. Patricia Newton, give her a round of applause. Now my evening is complete. First time I spoke in Baltimore, Sister Sekhmet was the one who brought me here, me and Wayne Chandler. And we spoke in a near-empty room, I think at Dunbar High School. Times have changed. Good to see you, sis. Next. Now here probably are the clearest examples when we talk about the beauty of blackness in Europe. And this is one depiction, this is one of my favorite ones from Switzerland, of a black Madonna and child. Now these are considered to be miracle workers, and the miracle working power is derived from their blackness. Of course, we are told that these do not represent the features of black people at all, but that the people who painted them used bad paint and they turned black. Or that the people who worship these icons, remember they're miracle workers, there are hundreds of them in Europe, used a lot of incense and candles, and the paint and the soot and the smoke got on the face, the hands, and the feet. Interesting that it would only get on the face, the hands, and the feet. Now this defies logic. If there was a miraculous icon and it got dirty, I would clean it off. Okay? If I painted something and I had any pride as a painter and the paint turned bad, I'd repaint it again. Now let's look at a few of these. Next. Of course, they're rooted in Aset and Heru from Nile Valley. Heru or Horus is where we get the word hero from. And Aset or Isis is usually depicted as a black woman seated on the throne. In fact, the name Aset means the throne, or a black woman with a throne on her head, where a sister belongs. Seated on the throne. Next. And this is a depiction of Asar, who is described as black and the most handsome man alive in some of the ancient literature. Next. Osiris. Here's another one from Krakow. Now this one doesn't really look very Africoid, although Africans do have a wide range of features. We range in complexion from snow to crow and bright to night. We have long noses, broad noses, the whole nine. All other humanity comes from us. Okay, understand that. So you could say a few things about this, but I think we will come to the conclusion that these were originally painted black, and they are now, and they were brought before crusading armies into battle because it was thought it would bring the army victory. And the icons would be damaged and destroyed, and they would paint them again. But sometimes they would not have the Africoid facial characteristics. At least that's one theory. This is from Krakow, Poland, next. And this is the most famous one from Poland. You can see this one has marks on the face. That comes from, it was damaged by a sword. This is the favorite icon of the current Pope. Next. This is from Montserrat, Spain. This one is so black that when the photograph was taken, it turned blue. It's that black, blue black. And it looks like little JC even is giving the peace sign. Peace, brother. Next. This one is from the Pyrenees in Spain, called the Queen of Nuria. Next. This one is a photograph I took myself in the Kremlin in Moscow in 1999. I was told that that was bad paint. Next. And this one has bad paint too. This is also from that same roll of film. Jesus has a little fuzzy natural on his head. That's paint too? Next. These are all from Eastern Europe. Next. Next. Beautiful icons. The Mother of God and the infant. Next. And here's a whole bunch of them. This is a Christmas card that a brother sent me about 15 years ago. With several depictions of our set, with the goddess from Turkey named Diana or Artemis of Ephesus, and other images of the Black Madonna. When the first crusade was preached, it was preached in front of a shrine of a Black Madonna in Le, France. When the Russians finally defeated the French army, it was after General Kutuzov insisted that the Russian army pray before Black Madonna. Joan of Arc's mother would pray before Black Madonna on a daily basis. The idea of a black nurturing mother, deeply rooted in the European psyche. Dr. Newton might have something to say about that. Next. This is Alado Equiano. This is a photograph I picked up in England last year. He is an abolitionist and a man of letters in 19th century England. Next. This black man is from 15th century France. Sharp-looking brother. Next. Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. And these are my own pictures from Russia. I have a love affair with Pushkin. Don't get me wrong, I'm very straight. I love black women. But there's something about Pushkin that really fires my imagination. Pushkin is considered the father of Russian literature. He had a vocabulary of more than 20,000 words. He's the Russian equivalent to Shakespeare. He is called by people like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky the Russian Atom, the Russian springtime, the Russian morning. He more or less invented the Russian language because at the time he lived, he was born of well-to-do parents in Moscow at the end of May 1799. Most Russian intellectuals wrote and spoke in French. He taught them to speak and write in Russian. And he's a bad African. His maternal great-grandfather was born in Ethiopia. And Pushkin relished his African ancestry, would engage him in a duel about how proud he was in his African. When he died, he was working on a book called The Moor or the African of Peter the Great. So I really have a fascination with this brother. He wrote in a language and in a manner that you could all understand. For example, here's my favorite poem by Pushkin begins. It's called I Loved You Once. And it starts, I loved you once, and my heart will not be still. And he goes on to tell this woman, he says, I loved you, it didn't work out, but don't worry, I'm not going to bother you. But I just wanted you to know. And we can all relate to that in a sense. All of us who are adults have probably been in love at one time or another, and more often than not, it didn't work out. But that doesn't mean you cease to love that person. And so Pushkin would write in a manner that anybody and everybody could appreciate. He was a fantastic brother. Let me show you some images I took of Pushkin. This is in one of his homes in St. Petersburg in the north. Next. And, go. There's a statue. That's Renoko down there, and that's Pushkin up there. Next. This is Pushkin's library. I actually went in his library, and he was so important that his library was kept the day it was when he died. When Russians found out that he died, they stopped their clocks. So we know that he died at exactly 2:45 in the afternoon, I forget the date, in January 1837. I think January 26th. Pushkin's library. Next. And there I am in Pushkin's library. That's a handsome brother right there, I'm telling you. Nice mudcloth vest. Next. Yeah, I like myself a lot. I love what I do. I'm very passionate about my work. Okay? I hope you can feel that. Now, as we leave Russia and wind down, I'm just going to take a few more minutes. But we've got to come to the Western Hemisphere to wrap it up, and then let's look at Africa one more time. This is interesting. Now, I went in two of Pushkin's houses. I went to where he was wounded in a duel. I went to where he went to school. I just followed the footsteps of Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin. I went to Russia on his 200th anniversary, and I actually had a chance to speak in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and I was very proud to honor my African ancestors. By the way, there's a very good book on Pushkin called Great Black Russian, written by John Oliver Killings. But one of the things I noticed I'd never seen before, never read about, is in both Pushkin's studies is a figure of a black man breaking the bonds of slavery with a nice little natural hairstyle. Now, not just once, next slide, but there it is, there's another one. This is like 1835. Today, he'd be called African-centered. Next, he'd be an Aztec. And this is a black man from the Caucasus. Now, I'm not going to say that the first Caucasians were black, but I think we could make that argument. The Caucasus is simply a mountain range, and if we are the first people on the planet, and we are the first people to live in that area, the logical conclusion would have to be we're the first Caucasians. But I ain't going to go there tonight. I don't know if I want to go there. This is a black man who lives on the southern slopes of the Caucasus Mountains and the eastern shores of the Black Sea in what is now the country of Georgia. Black as the night, black Russian. Next. Straight, no chaser.
Yes, sir.
And finally, we end up, well, not finally, but we now are in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, this is one of the famous Olmec heads I assume you've all seen. There are 17 or 18 of these that have been excavated. Of course, I told you about the snails on the Buddha's head, and I told you about the bad paint on the face of the Black Madonna child. What we are told about this is that these do not represent the features of Africans after all. The Olmec civilization is the parent civilization of the Americans. It goes back to at least 2500 BC. Dr. Van Sertima has made a career out of writing and lecturing about it. But we are told sometimes that these look like normal Native Americans, whatever that is, because you Africans are the first Native Americans too. We're the native people on the planet. We didn't wait for a white man to come get us and put shackles and chains on our hands and our feet and say, come on. We were there when the white boy got there. Columbus told us that. What these people are telling us is that these look like Native American. You figure it out. And there was a big old earthquake. Now, I grew up in Southern California. I know what earthquakes can do. Supposedly, this earthquake caused all these heads, some of them weighing up to 40 tons, with braids in the back, by the way, to fall off their pedestals and roll around. And they rolled in the dirt and the mud. And they rolled for a long time. And when they finally stopped rolling, they were brown with Africoid features. They teach you that at universities. Let's go to the next slide. Now, we're just going to assume that this brother was in that same earthquake. This is a black man from Sudan. The earthquake was universal in scale, we assume. You know what I want to do is I want to get a picture of the head of Shaquille O'Neal and compare it to one of those Olmec heads. And I'm going to get an Olmec head and Shaq's picture of his head and send it to him. And hope he sends me some money. Say, brother, you're doing a great job. I know you need a patron. That's what I'm hoping. Because I love black folk. I love all black people. Or 99.9% of them anyway. And that's the criteria you must have an undying love for African people. Because African people will try you and wear you out. And if you don't love them and love yourself, you might as well give up. I love Tiger Woods, confused though he may be. I love Michael Jackson. I love Whoopi Goldberg. Do you know, I was telling you all about that brother from Bathurst Island, the Tiwi. Remember I said they like reggae music? I don't know anybody but the people in my groups in 2000 and 2002 who've been to Bathurst Island. I don't know anybody else who's been there. And I was shocked to see when I got there in this shop we went to visit with all these fabulous clothes and pieces of cloth and wooden ornaments was a picture of Whoopi Goldberg. She had actually been there hanging out with these black people. I was shocked. So there's hope. Keep hope alive. Next. And these, look at that, from ancient Mexico. Before Columbus was a twinkle in anybody's eye. Africans sailed across the Atlantic to the Americas and helped introduce civilization there. Helped show how to move large objects in stone. Introduced calendars, forms of agriculture. Next. From Panama, from the 9th century, the 10th century. Look at that. In Panama. Next. This is a photograph I took last year in a museum in Lima, Peru, from a culture called the Mochica, or Moche, black people in Peru, before the Incas. Next. This is a piece I shot in the Boston Museum. There's a black man among the Mayas. Next. This is a black saint. I showed you St. Maurice. This is St. Martin de Porres. We could also talk about St. Benedict the Moor. He's the patron saint of the poor and downtrodden in South America. I think he was born in Panama. Next. Another depiction of St. Martin de Porres. Next. This is a black Madonna in Ecuador, in South America. Usually when we talk about the black presence in South America, we're talking about Brazil. But you have black people in virtually every country in South America. Struggling, impoverished. Next, in search of themselves. That's a little sister from Haiti, and that's the African hero Dessalines. Now, he's a contemporary of Toussaint Louverture, but he's different from Toussaint. Toussaint negotiated with Napoleon. That's what got him killed. He trusted in the goodness of white people. Dessalines said there's only one good white person, and that's the one who's not breathing anymore. And he would not compromise. He became the first emperor of Haiti. We should bow down and take our hats off to the Haitians because they made great sacrifices. I'm scheduled to go to Haiti in October, and I'll come back with a story to tell you. Next. This is, as we wrap up, this is Henry Highland Garnet. Now these are modern folks for the most part, race men and race women. Henry Highland Garnet was a black man, a preacher, an abolitionist, a race man, and he's the one who coined the expression who popularized it, let your motto be resistance. Ashe. Ashe. Next. And this is Martin Robeson Delaney. Delaney is the person who gave us the expression Africa for the Africans. He named all his children after famous Africans. He named one after Alexander Dumas. And I already told you the expression by Dumas. One we already know, and that is one for all and all for one. But the other one, I repeat again, a man's mind is elevated to the status of the women with whom he associates. That's Dumas. He named another one after St. Cyprian. He named another one after an Ethiopian emperor. He named another one after a Cuban revolutionary. He wrote a book on the African origin of Nile Valley civilization in the 1870s. He went to Africa. He's the first black man to be commissioned an officer in the Civil War. Douglass would say, Frederick Douglass, when I wake up in the morning, I thank God for making me a man. But when Delaney wakes up, he thanks God for making him a black man. Ashe. Next. This is Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was born in the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, August 12th, I think 1832, I believe. He went to Egypt in 1866. He says, I know my ancestors in civilization of Greece. He's very instrumental in the establishment of Sierra Leone and Liberia. Ashe. Next. This is Alexander Crummell, another Episcopal minister, a race man, who boasted that both sides of his family were descended from African royalty. And he would write in his private correspondence, this is a preacher now, a minister, in his private correspondence, that his family had never been polluted with white people. That his family had uncontaminated bloodlines. And he thought that was the greatest thing in the world. A lot of us are just the opposite of that. We're so proud to have somebody white in our family tree. We boast about it. But how did that white person get in the family tree? It usually was not a voluntary encounter. So don't celebrate the rapist in your family. Next. This is Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dunbar was a brilliant writer. After Frederick Douglass died, he was the second most famous African in this country after Booker T. Washington. And I just read a book by somebody, I guess it's a dissertation, about Paul Laurence Dunbar and his wife Alice Dunbar. And apparently, according to this book, and it's based on his own correspondence, Dunbar hated himself. He hated being black. And he despised himself. And this is a very handsome brother. Can you imagine that? But that's how a lot of us are. We have a lot of work to do. Even if we got rid of all the white folk in the world today, we still have a lot of problems because we've internalized white supremacy. It's in our psyche now. Next. This is, I think the sister's name is Diane Fletcher. This is from the book Black Indians by William Loren Katz, an excellent book, and it talks about the relationship between so-called Native Americans and Africans in this country. I think a lot of us have Native American ancestry. I know I do. Next. And this is the greatest of them all. And this is Marcus Garvey, who said, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will. Garvey wasn't waiting around for white folks. He formed an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. I'm a member of that organization, dues-paying member. Someone asked Garvey once, how did you come to form this organization? And he said in so many words, I looked around for the black man's army, his navy, his men of big affairs, and could not find them. And so I decided to help create them. That's the mentality we must have. Stop saying black people can unite. Stop saying what we can't do and roll up your sleeves and get to work. You know what? I love black people so much that I would rather be a part of a black defeat than to acknowledge failure, than to throw up my hands. I believe we're going to win. But even if I didn't think we were going to win, I'd be fighting anyway. Because I'm not prepared to concede victory to these folk. I'm not going to do that. Garvey organized 6 to 12 million people. He even have a branch of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League in Australia. You have a Black Panther Party in Australia. You had the specter of black power in Australia. You have freedom riders in Australia. Based on your lead, you'd be surprised at how the rest of the African world views Africans in this country, how much they're waiting on you. We are the survivors of the storm. In some cases, as messed up as we are in the head, we are some of the strongest, most vigorous Africans in the world. And because we are in the eye of the storm, because we're in this country and the media is all around us, our image is portrayed all over the world. So we have to be very careful about our actions. Garvey, Ashe. Next. Now this is Chancellor Williams, one of my favorites. As a young brother, he was called Ebony. And he was a troublemaker, my kind of guy. And he wrote the fabulous book, Destruction of Black Civilization, where he tried to address the question that I get more than any other question. That is, Brother Runoko, if black people had all of this going on, what happened to us? You ever ask that question? How do we lose it? How do we get in the situation that we are in? Chancellor Williams attempted to address that. It's not a simple issue, not a simple question. He also wrote a book called The Rebirth of African Civilization. He wrote a book called And If I Were White. He was a remarkable brother who taught at Howard University for a long time, and his mentor was the great William Leo Hansberry. Next. And let me just conclude by showing you a few images of African children. And I'll finish up that way, because I have by now collected 3,000 or 4,000 of these slides. and we could be here for a long time. That'd be a good excuse for me to get invited back, hopefully. This is a little girl from Suriname, and she is a member of the Saramakas. And these were Africans who fought against enslavement. Sometimes they're called Maroons. Next slide. This is a little brother from the Dominican Republic. I also hope to go to the Dominican Republic in October. I'm going to make up for this time when I was hospitalized, thinking I was going to lose my leg. It bothers me when I hear sisters and brothers from the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, blacker than anybody here, referred to as Hispanic, because they speak Spanish. Next. And this is my own little daughter from San Antonio. Isn't she cute? Right. It took a long time to get that out of you all there. And I hardly get to see her. Next. From, I believe, Senegal. Those, I got this from a National Geographic magazine. Those earrings are made of solid gold. Africa is a wealthy place with the poorest race. Oh my, what a disgrace. What are we going to do about it? It doesn't have to be that way. It hasn't always been a poor place. Children. One is so shy she's got her whole face covered up. And the other one has a smile that won't quit. And the littlest one is the boldest one. She says, Renoko, you can take my picture all day. Next. And this is the last slide for tonight. And this is a very powerful image that I show whenever I get the opportunity. I don't think I've ever shown it here. This is a little girl from the Gambia. This picture must be about 6 or 7 years old. Gambia is a beautiful country in West Africa that I have never visited. I intend to. And a friend of mine was in Gambia and took this photograph. This little girl was begging. And she took the photograph on a bus. Beautiful black child with fair skin and good hair, based on my concept. And she's looking, I think, at each and every one of us. And she's saying Renoko has worked his butt off tonight. He's worked hard. And he hopes you all appreciate the presentation. He hopes you all feel better about yourself than you did when you came in the door. But she's looking at each and every one of us, asking us, black folk, what y'all gonna do? It's not enough just to feel good. You got to do something with it. You have to leave this room tonight more prepared to support black economic institutions, black educational institutions, to build stronger black families. You know that in the past, I mentioned these 3 phases. Humanity born in Africa. You can say that's a sign of our greatness, the fact that we gave birth to humanity. The second phase, African origin of civilization and human culture. We can take pride in that. We can say our greatness is also measured on that standard. And then you can say another sign of our greatness is the fact that we have survived the storm up to this point. The Ma'afa, we withstood it. Our resilience is another sign of our greatness. But I would like to think that future generations will add a 4th component to our greatness. And they will say that there lived a great people who gave humanity to the world, who gave civilization to the world, who survived the storm and then bounced back to achieve their rightful place in the world of nations. Martin Luther King, who I don't know if you could say was African-centered, but certainly was a man of great courage, at the very least, said something, and I'll leave you with this quote because you rarely ever hear it. At the height of the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, Dr. King said something that is very profound. And it summarizes where I want us to go. He said, when the history books are written, let future generations say that there lived a great people, a black people, who injected new dignity into the veins of civilization. And sisters and brothers, we are that people. Hotep, and thank you very much.
Brother Ranoku Rashid. I hope you all enjoyed this presentation here. Now, did you enjoy the presentation? What to talk about now? First, I'd like to say, got Dr. Newton, Dr. Patricia Newton, and your correct African name is Nana Akosua. So give her a round of applause. For those of you who weren't here when she did the last lecture that we did, Early Sexual Trauma in the African American Community, you got to get that tape. She laid it out. The sister went back into history and told what the Africans were doing, what the free Greeks were doing, and what other people were doing around the world. You got to get that tape. We got Dr. Chazelle. Give him a round of applause. And brothers and sisters, as I was saying earlier, the only way that we can keep this lecture series going is by the support of you. And I'd like to, for all of you to give yourselves a round of applause, because before the event started, we sold about 20 tickets before this event. And it was looking like, okay, dang, here's another one, you know what I'm saying? We're going to have a few people in. And I was telling the brother earlier, I said, look, we don't get surprised by lectures. There's nowhere in the world that many people going to show up at this lecture here tonight. So it look like we're going to go in the hole again. But give yourselves a round of applause because you made this happen tonight. So, what we want to do now, if you have anything extra right now, so we can keep this lecture series going strong, anything, dollar, pennies, whatever, we got some baskets that's going to be going around. If you can help us out a little bit more, help Reality Speaks out, contribute something. Another thing that we're going to be doing, some of you got the letters, we want to do what's called a Reality Speaks membership card. And we would do that quarterly. It's a $30 membership card, but what it do is it'll be $10 per lecture. And what it do is it would give us advance funding, because a lot of times we got to book up trains, we got to book up airplanes in advance and different things of that nature. And a lot of times you don't want to, if the event is going bad, you don't want to hold up the lecturer by committing to them for a lecture, and then the ticket sale's not going good, and then you had to cancel, then they lose out, and then it's one big long thing. So we want to keep these lectures going strong, right?
Yes, sir.
So if you're interested in that Reality Speaks membership card, also we have a mailing list in the back. And last I want to say, we have my nephew, Ryan Mason. He did the flyers for this event, 13 years old. He did all the sound and everything for this event. So Brother David Miller in the back, one of the vendors. Me and Brother David, we did the Million Youth March with Dr. Khaled Muhammad. We started with the Tubman City Alliance here, and we did some good work together, but the brother has a book coming out. Support him in the back. We got Sister Akor. We got the sisters from Conscious Heads Salon, and support everybody here. And let me see. Again, for those people who came late, we do have a bus trip going to Tony Browder in D.C. What's the name of the tour again? The African Center tour we have going in October. Oh, and also the Melanin Conference, October the 20th, October the 12th. And that's going to be down at Morgan. And we have flyers here. You can get your flyers for the Melanin Conference. We want to support Dr. Newton and their endeavor with the Melanin Conference. When I get up here, sometimes people give me so much information. I'm trying to get everything in. So please go around, support all of the vendors here. We're going to come back in about 20 minutes or so, and we're going to do a question and answer period. So go around, support the vendors and everything, get to know each other, do some networking and all. Peace. Oh, and Brother Ranoku has tapes up here. He has audio and he has a video series up here, so please come and support him.
Thank you for your patience.
All right, we're having a question and answer period, sisters and brothers.
Sir, thank you for coming here. I just want to ask you, is there any way you can find photographs of Shakespeare and Beethoven, because they are black too?
Okay. All right, the question is about black people in Europe. And the brother wanted to know if, I guess the question is, if I can rephrase it, did we have photographs of Shakespeare and Beethoven? Yeah, anybody can get a photograph of Shakespeare. Now, I'm not saying Shakespeare was black now. Did I imply that? Uh-huh. Right. There's a book by a brother named Edward Jones, and there's something about, yeah, there it is right there. What book is that? That's J. Rogers. Which one? Nature Knows No Color Line? Sex and Race. Well, there's a picture of Beethoven right there. Rogers referred to Beethoven. He said that he was sometimes called the Black Spaniard, and sometimes referred to as the Moor. Now, you can get a photograph of Shakespeare anywhere. But I have never found anything to indicate that Shakespeare was an African, or that he had African blood in his veins. I'm not ready to claim everybody, but there is a brother named Edward Jones who said that Julius Caesar was black. That brother's serious. He's going to get that book. Just forgot all about Brother Noco. Just walked out. No, that's what they like that back there. They like for you to walk off like that. But no, I've never found anything black about Shakespeare. I don't know if I mentioned it today or I talked about it last night. Shakespeare fell in love with a black woman, though, named Lucy Negro. You do have black people in England during the Shakespearean period. You have black people in Ireland. You have black people in Wales. You have black people in Scotland. You have black people in Norway. We are global people. If I was going to the presentation I did last night in D.C., I could have easily called it World History for a New Generation. Because even if we talk about African history, Dr. Clark referred to African history as the missing pages of world history. We are global people. And you find black folk in some of the most unlikely places. And I find that very exciting. You know, in spite of all the problems African people have today, it's a very exciting time to be alive. And to be African and to be active in the reconstruction of our people. And history plays a very vital part in that. That's my speech. Yes? This sister has a question. You want to take the mic?
Thank you for that great presentation. My question is, Reality Speaks is sponsoring a study group from Destruction of Black Civilization, and we're on like chapter 2, and it's been like 8 weeks. I'm real interested to know what you think about, I was real amazed by most of the things, like you said, it was a magnificent book. The Great City of Thebes. Do you know anything more about it? I was just so amazed. They said this was the greatest city that ever was. And do you know anything more about the Thebans? I'm surprised that I get to this age and I'm just finding out about this great place. And anybody who hasn't read The Destruction of Black Civilization, it will turn your life around.
All right. This is Brother Jabari's mother, by the way. Give her a round of applause. Believe me, it's very special when your family is involved and they support you. My mother is 84. She's never seen me give a presentation in public before. And now her health is not good, so what I did one afternoon, I was in Los Angeles, is I invited my whole family. Upon pain of excommunication, you had to show. And I rented a slide projector, and I did a presentation for my whole family. They had never seen me speak before, and they were amazed. And I would also invite Dr. Giselle and Dr. Newton if they want to comment. They have probably a lot more information than I, and maybe they can enlighten us on some of these things. I read Destruction of Black Civilization for the first time in 1972. I was in an organization called the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And that was the first book we were required to read. We read that book first, and then Malcolm X Speaks. And the book just turned my life upside down. Now, I must confess that when I review the book today, I don't agree with everything Chancellor Williams says. Some of the things I read in there I find to be inaccurate. Okay? But who am I? I guess any scholars have the right to disagree based on the information. For example, Chancellor Williams seems to imply that by the time of the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, about 3300 BC, that most of the people, thank you, African, who lived in, did y'all get some of the bean pies and stuff back there? The water? Good. I got 2 bean pies. That most of the people who lived in northern Egypt or lower Egypt were mixed to the point of, for all intents and purposes, being non-African. I don't think that's accurate, but it's a magnificent book. He also spends a lot of time talking about 100-gated thieves, as the Greeks called it, a waset. And there's a lot of information about waset, not all of it from an African perspective. There's a book, it may be back there, called Egypt, Child of Africa, edited by Dr. Van Sertima. And the great Asa Hilliard has an excellent article on waset in there. I would recommend that. Dr. Giselle, Sister Pat, you want to add anything? Dr. Newton, you want to make any comments? Y'all can have it any time.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for such an excellent and exuberating lecture. I guess my question is more or less like 2 parts. When you made mention, when you were doing your slide, how that these heads were found in different parts of the world called Olmecs.
The Olmec heads.
Yes, the heads. The question was asked, how did the heads get there? And now, were those heads brought there, or the people came and sculptured the heads? The indigenous people that you referred to while they were there. Okay?
All right. Good. All right. The question is, first question, is about the Olmec heads. Now the Olmec is spelled O-L-M-E-C. And the Olmec civilization is universally regarded as the first civilization of the Western Hemisphere, the so-called New World. The people didn't call themselves Olmec. This is a term that archaeologists have used to designate the area. The Olmec civilization is believed to have begun about 2500 BC, and it probably lasted for about 2,000 years. And from what I can gather, all the rest of the civilizations of the Western Hemisphere are based on that. The Toltecs, the Zapotecs, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Mayans, all seem to be rooted in that Olmec foundation. So the Olmecs are very important. Now, we find a lot of evidence to suggest that the Olmecs had African people within the hierarchy. And the argument is basically this. Among African-centered people, were the Olmecs themselves African, or were there Africans among the Olmec? Now, there's a brother named Clyde Amar Winters in Chicago who argues, and LeGrand Clegg, one of my mentors too in LA, is the city attorney for Compton, California, who argues that the Olmec were African people. I don't believe that. I think that the Olmec were Native American, whatever Native American is, with Africans in the hierarchy. Maybe this comes from me hanging out with Ivan Van Sertima for so long, but he believes that at a certain point in time, perhaps during the 25th dynasty, or maybe during the 20th dynasty in Egypt, that Africans, either by accident or design, sailed from the Nile region through the Mediterranean and across the Atlantic, and came into the Olmec hinterland and found a civilization that was already evolved and added special components to it. Moving large objects in stone, calendars, agricultural science. The reason he argues that is because Ivan has gotten access to evidence from the royal cemeteries. A Polish scholar named Andrzej Wardzinski did work at some of the major grave sites, royal cemeteries, and he found that when you analyze the bones, that about 5 to 10% of them had clearly Africoid phenotype or skeletal remains. Okay? Not all of them, but a certain percentage, and that's what I tend to believe. just like during the heyday of imperial Rome, you have African Roman emperors, you have Tertullian, you have St. Cyprian, but most of the Romans were not African, but you have Africans who participated in that. Now, when you have the evidence of, what do you have besides the head? You have a lot of terracottas, small Africoid-looking figurines among Olmec civilization. But the most impressive pieces that you have are those heads. And I think there are 17 or 18 of those heads that have been excavated at a place called Tres Zapotes, San Lorenzo, and La Venta. And it seems that those heads, the stone came from about 40 miles away. And it was probably rolled to the side or put on a barge or a raft and taken to the construction site and carved at that time or chiseled. So 40, 50 miles. And the biggest one was nicknamed Joe Louis. It tells you a lot. And it's 40 tons. But that's not that big of a deal, because it would seem that a lot of the stone, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong now, for the pyramids on the Giza Plateau actually was taken from Aswan, 500 miles away, put on a barge, floated down the Nile, taken to the construction site, and assembled at that point. So, I mean, 500 miles is a lot farther than 40 or 50 miles. So I think that one of the things that the Africans did is they showed the Olmecs how to move large objects in stone.
But that's the second part of the question. And the second part of the question was related to the building of the pyramids, and as you alluded to, that some people want to say outer space creatures came without giving Africans the credit for doing this. And as I understand it, some of these stones weigh at least 2 tons or etc. But my question is, how did they get those stones into place? Had they found that out? And other part of that, the embalming of bodies, you know, have they found out that secret yet? Seems like it might be lost, but it seems like someone would be passed down to some generation.
So the twofold question is how the pyramids were constructed, and the other question is how much do we know about embalming techniques? Dr. Newton, you want that?
Not really, but there is some evidence to support that when the construction of the buildings, which you call pyramid, that there were around it were built brick casings, of which they used and built from the bottom up around the outside. There are some, what's called the word, facets, where you lay them together, where you, what's the word called, where you make the little holes and one will fit inside the other. But to actually know exactly, it's all conjecture. You have 2 schools of thought. We do know they weren't built by slaves. We do know that. And they were built by people in worship of their God, or their divinity. And they were replicas of heavens at the time of the constellations in heaven, at the time. The way if you go back and do computer analysis, you will see that constellations in the heaven are very similar to what you have on the Giza Plateau. In terms of embalming, they use natron, which you probably heard of, which is what they use, and they extrapolate parts of the body and keep parts of the various organs in times of joy. That is the first science known to man, embalming. It was perfected by the ancient Hamites.
All right. Like that. Give her a round of applause.
I just wanted to know, do you have a mailing list? You travel around a lot. You going to Asia, when, next month? November. Okay. I'm a poor woman. I would need to know ahead of time to go with you on some of these places, because I've been doing a lot of reading and I would like to go. So I just want to know. Okay. Thank you.
Now, the last 3 or 4 years I've started giving tours. Dr. Newton gives more tours than I do. Yeah. Now, that's what I do. I tend to travel off the beaten path a lot of times, and I take a lot of pride in that. I do most of my traveling by myself, because you go places where most people either are not interested in, or sometimes it's easier to travel by yourself. When I have a group, I rarely enjoy myself, because I'm working so hard to make sure everybody else is enjoying themselves, that sometimes I'll take a group and then I'll go back again by myself. Now, I've been to places like Cambodia, like Burma, like parts of India, where, you really literally stop traffic. And sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if I had been in Indonesia. I'm supposed to be in Indonesia right now, somewhere near in central Java. And I wonder what it would have been like if I had been over there and I had this medical emergency. I might would have lost a leg. But if you can't go this year, remember I had 2 tours this year since I didn't take a group anywhere last year. Last year I was supposed to take a group to Kenya, and it didn't work out. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that I didn't plan the tour, somebody else did, and it was really a fiasco for me. We're going to do that. So the next time, this year I decided to do 2 trips, and the first was to Aboriginal Australia, which I've talked about. Fabulous trip. Fabulous trip. Deep stuff happened on that trip. Very profound things. And now we're going in November to Southeast Asia on a temple tour. I think the finest temples in the world that I have seen outside of the Nile Valley are in Southeast Asia. That's maybe because I haven't been to Ethiopia and some other places. Next year we're going to Fiji. Next November, December. And again, the Fijians are the only people I know of outside of Africa who embrace their African roots with great pride and enthusiasm, and will tell you they come from Africa too, tell you when they left Africa, how they left Africa, the routes that they sailed to get to Fiji, and then they will tell you that most of the other people in the South Pacific have the same beliefs, that the people of the Solomon Islands, the Vanuatu, share the same opinions. And then in 2004, it looks like we're going to do more in Spain. Spain, maybe Morocco too, and perhaps Portugal. So if you're interested, I think a lot of you got my card. On my website at the bottom, you have the URL here. The trips are listed, and you can get all the information you want. My trips are for African people only. That's the plan, at least. Nobody else it's been African so far, and I intend to keep it that way. And I usually like to travel with groups of like 17 to 20 people. And it's nice and intimate, and people get to know each other. I have regular lectures and good trips. Yes, sister, did you have another point you wanted to add?
Yes. Have you seen the great Zimbabwe?
Yeah.
Have they found any more information on regarding to the group who claimed that civilization, what the civilization stood for, etc., etc.?
I think the people who built Great Zimbabwe are the Shona people. And they've lived in that area for a long time. I had an opportunity to visit Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe in 2000. I went by myself. And when you go by yourself, you can do almost anything. And, you have a lot of problems in Zimbabwe now. And back then, even then, there was a fuel crisis. And you couldn't most people could not get gasoline for their vehicles more than like once a week. And I was in Zimbabwe. I was determined to go there. That was one of the major reasons I went anyway. And I caught an old bus, me and another brother. It was a trip. And we got there, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm glad I went. But after you've been in Egypt, and you've seen the Valley of the Kings, and you've seen the pyramid, you've seen the Giza Plateau, you've been to Saqqara, almost everything else pales into insignificance. And Zimbabwe is nice, and if you get a chance, go. But it's nothing like the Nile Valley. It's much later, and it lacks the precision of the monuments of ancient Egypt. The thing that I enjoyed the most when I was in Zimbabwe was going to a place called Mosi Otunya, or the Smoke That Thunders. White folks call it Victoria Falls. And this is a series of waterfalls about 40 miles long at the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe. And it's made up of the water from the Zambezi River, which flows through Angola, and then I think Zambia, and at the border it drops about 300 feet. And they call it the smoke that thunders, or Mosi-oa-Tunya. I've never seen anything like it before. I stayed there for 3 days and just hung out on the Zambezi River and had a wonderful experience. So if you go to Zimbabwe, Great Zimbabwe is important, but Mosi-oa-Tunya is just one of the greatest displays of nature I've ever experienced. Yes, brother.
Yes. So, Rashid, what I was curious about, in one of the slides, it showed the skeletal remains of the oldest woman, the oldest.
Dinknesh.
Right?
Or Lucy.
It looked real small, and even the statue of Imhotep were our ancestors, smaller in stature than what we are now.
I think so. One thing you notice when you go to a museum and you see Egyptian artifacts, if you ever see any beds to me look incredibly small. And it does make me wonder about the size of the people. Now that image of Imhotep is a very small image. A lot of the images of Imhotep that I have seen come from late in Egyptian history, like the 26th dynasty. And I think during that period of time, Imhotep is deified, so you have a lot of images of Imhotep. As far as those bones of Dinknesh are concerned, I have not seen them, I've just seen the picture. Now, Dr. Newton has been to Ethiopia. You want to talk about Dinknesh a little bit? The site? Yeah. I call them diminutive Africoid. Twice a name that we give to the ones in Africa, but you also find them in Asia and other parts too. I even think that the leprechauns in Ireland is the story of diminutive Africoids who went to that part of the world and who faded into the misty realms of fairy tales, myths, and legends. Yeah. We'll get to you. Let me finish up this question.
Okay. As far as the indigenous people of Australia not being called Aborigines, well, do they call themselves? I know during the presentation they call themselves people of Africa. As far as the ethnic thing.
I would say, based on my experience, I've been to Australia 3 times, and I'm going back again next summer, just by myself, to another part of Australia. I'm going to go to every state in Australia. And right now, the 3 states I haven't been to. I haven't been to Western Australia, I haven't been to Victoria, and I haven't been to Tasmania. 2 or 3 years from now, I'm going to organize another trip to Aboriginal Australia. But the common name is blackfella. Some of them like that and others don't. They don't like for white people to call them black fellas. But it's okay for black people to use the term themselves. Depending on where you are in Australia, you have a particular name. We can refer to all the people of the motherland as Africans. But you have Nigerians, you have Congolese, you have Ethiopians, and within those countries you have the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Oroma, etc. So the word Aborigine for the people of Australia and the indigenous people would be like most of us would respond if we were called a Negro or colored. Those terms are just not in vogue anymore. Black folk in Australia are in terrible shape too. And one of the problems they have is deep despair because they are a very small minority within their own country and they have no representation in government. They have the British parliamentary system and I think you have maybe 2 black MPs for the whole country. So nobody really speaks for them. And so they are really encouraged when they interact with black folk from other parts of the world. Same thing for the black people in India, the untouchables and the tribal people. When I go over there, I really literally get treated like a hero. I never get treated like that in the United States. But in India, people, it's like I'm a king. They have press conferences. People want to come out and meet me. It gets so bad that the government gets angry because they don't want black people from America coming over there stirring their black people up. And I feel like if I go to India anytime soon, I'll get assassinated over there.
Is there also Black Panther Party in India?
There's a group in India called the Dalit Panthers. Now, the term untouchable is the basic term. That means crushed, broken, and oppressed. No, it means, untouchable means that the very touch, sometimes the shadow, even the sound of the voices of these folk is considered polluting or contaminating to other people. Now, same thing with the word black fella. They don't want most people to call them untouchables, but they want me to use that word. Because when I'm doing speeches and I'm talking about them, it really speaks to their harsh condition. Now, they call themselves Dalits, D-A-L-I-T-S, and that's a new word, about 40 years old, which does mean crushed, broken, and oppressed. So sometimes we talk about the Dalits, the black untouchables of India. Did I answer your question at all? I know I talked about a lot of stuff. Don't know if I answered your question. We're running out of time?
One more question.
Well, let's make it 2 quick ones, if you don't mind. Okay. Yeah, I have to catch a train and go back to New York in about an hour. So, yes.
I don't know if it'll be quick. You mentioned something.
Question is the problem. The answer is the problem.
I heard you talk about the big question. This is my first time to a setting like this.
Good.
And
how'd you like it?
I appreciate the knowledge.
How'd you hear about it?
A friend of mine told me right here.
Good. All right.
And I hear about a greatness a lot. And big question for me, I'm always wondering what happened. Did you answer that? I heard you mention something.
That's another lecture.
That's what I said. I don't know.
I don't think the question is what happened to us. The brother's saying this is his first time he's been at a lecture like this, and he really enjoyed it, which makes me feel very good. I know Reality Speaks appreciates that. Give this brother a round of applause. First time. And the question basically is what happened. Read the book Destruction of Black Civilization. And what do you think?
I read a lot of books, but still, it's still coming from my mind. That was like Chancellor Williams, right?
Yeah. I think that book comes closest to answering it. I'm not prepared to say that what happened was we were nice to white people and they did us in. That's too simplistic for me. Because not only are black people on the bottom in terms of their relationship with Europeans, but we're on the bottom in terms of our relationship with everybody. Black people on the bottom in Vietnam, in Cambodia. Let me tell you a quick story. Now let me tell this quick story. You find it interesting. A friend of mine, a few years ago, in fact, I was supposed to be invited. Y'all just hold it, just 1 second. I'm gonna make it quick. I want you to hear this. To Ecuador. I was supposed to be invited to Ecuador. I was planning on going. Couldn't go, but I wanted to get some information. A friend of mine had gone to Ecuador, and I was asking him what his experience was. He said, Renoco, I went to Ecuador, to make a long story short, and I heard about a community of black people that was 500 years old. In other words, it was pre-Columbian. And I was determined to go there, he said. So he got a boat, got somebody to steer the boat, got a guide and a translator, and went way upriver. Said it took him 8 hours. He got there. All African community. Said the mayor came out to meet him. Said all the officials of the community came out to meet him. They had never interacted with an African American before. I said, what you talking about? He said they talked about everything. He said, there's only one thing, Renoco. He said there was one store in this isolated community in the middle of nowhere, and it was run by white people. Wherever we are in the world, with hardly no exception, we're on the bottom. What is it about us that allows for other people to dominate us no matter where we are? I don't have a simple answer for that. When I do these presentations, I'm trying to make black folks feel good about themselves. I think that's most important, that we resurrect our pride and who we are. But at some point in time, we have to have a critical evaluation of us and say, what is it we are doing to allow other people to subjugate us on a universal scale? That's a must, but it's not time for it now. Yeah. Last quick question. Yes, in the back.
First, I just want to thank you for clarifying the untouchable of Indian art. You did it untouchable years ago. They said the untouchables of Indian were so units that were homosexuals, but they weren't so gathered as have children. They ran in this worship of Indian, so thank you for that. But essentially, you find icons in the six. There's 7 to the last one, which is
I only heard two of those. Let me address them right quick. The first one is easy. Cleopatra, as far as we know, there are at least 7 Cleopatras. And the most famous one is Cleopatra VII, who was a very unattractive woman, by the way. I've never found any African ancestry in Cleopatra VII. So, yeah, that's a common, that's something we say a lot. We talk about Cleopatra as though there were only one of them, there were a whole bunch of them. The other part that I heard was something about eunuchs in India. Eunuchs were not necessarily homosexuals. Eunuchs were men who had been castrated. I think had their testicles removed or something like that. It did not necessarily make them homosexual. I guess it neutered them in a sense. And that is something that comes out of Arab Islamic culture. It is not African. And I think that that practice may still go on in certain parts of the world. Thank you very much, sisters and brothers.
Thank you.
For those of you who have not had an opportunity, I still have 5 videotapes left. There's one on Asia, there's one on Australia, there's one on India. A series of audio tapes called Let the Ancestors Speak, where you have the speeches by Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, and Chancellor Williams. They're $5 and the videos are $20. If I don't see you soon, I'll see you later. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Good seeing you.